I agree that I think Liz Truss's, when she resigned, her very, very short resignation speech suggested that she did, if not explicitly, at least implicitly understand that everything had gone completely wrong under her very short tenure. But in that speech just now, it felt as though she was speaking up for her principles, for her sort of libertarian principles. And of course, Truss does have a core of supporters, libertarian, small state Thatcherites, on the back benches, and I think it sounds as though she's going to be sort of leading that particular caucus in Parliament, which could be very difficult indeed for Rishi Sunak.
Well, let's actually bring Darren in, who is in Downing Street. Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, who's witnessed these, well, we're going to say historic scenes. There've been quite a few historic scenes in these past weeks and months, of course, but there is a different mood music, I think, Darren, when we look at what he was saying, not just about acknowledging mistakes that were made, but talking about what he did during COVID. I did everything I could to protect people and businesses with schemes like furlough. There are always limits, more so now than ever. But I promise you this, I will bring that same compassion to the challenges that we face today.
Yeah, there was quite a few themes from that speech. First of all, as you've touched upon, fundamentally, he was trying to explain to the British public, we are in a very, very difficult situation. Ultimately, it's the reason he is Prime Minister, and he is not going to shy away from the fact that there are lots and lots of difficult decisions to be made. And that's fundamentally, as he explained, because mistakes were made by the previous administration and that the party needed to admit that mistakes had been made. I think a slight dig at the fact that Liz Truss, in her speech, an hour and a half ago, made no reference to the fact that she, in her short tenure, the shortest tenure as Prime Minister, had made mistakes. So what he is trying to say is that these are serious times, and I'm a serious guy, and I'm going to work damn hard to get us through these serious times. That is his ultimate pitch to the British public on that initial speech. Also interesting, you talking there, weren't you, about Boris Johnson? There was praise somewhat for the Prime Minister, but my word, there was again a sting in the tail, if you like, to one of his predecessors, in the sense that he said he would run a Downing Street and government that was built on integrity and professionalism. Now, given the fact that one of the criticisms of Boris Johnson's premiership is that it was not full of integrity and professionalism, I think that is again a sign that he wants to break from the past, from those two predecessors, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. So a speech in which he is trying to argue that he is clearly the best man for the job, that he's going to work hard, that things are not going to be easy, but that he, as he demonstrated during the COVID pandemic, he is your man in these kind of difficult situations. Of course, that's all very easy to say. It is going to be fascinating when he has to make those difficult decisions, whether he gets them right, and of course how his party reacts, because one of the other things he's very aware of is the disunity in the party, and he talked time and again about trying to bring the country but also the party together, and that would be built on this issue of trust, which he argued is something that you cannot just talk about, it has to be earned, and it has to be earned through decisions. And just a little note on what Gloria was talking about at the start, the very fact that it was just him on the doorstep. By the way, the speech was a bit less robotic than yesterday. I thought it was much better delivered than that slightly weird speech he made at Conservative Central Office. The decision being made, I think, by his team to try and keep this relatively low-key. So we didn't see, as you normally would, staff members gather outside number 11. None of his MP supporters were here in Downing Street. His family were not here. There was a very deliberate decision made by number 10 today that this was going to be a bit more low-key. I think given the fact that, you know what, we've seen so many of these in recent weeks, maybe it wasn't a bad decision for the Sunak team to make.
Darren, we'll speak to you throughout the day. There may be some interesting comings and goings, public ones, as he assembles his top team as we are on air. You'll bring us all of that and the speculation live.
Now, let's just reflect on what the opposition are making of this, because the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has just tweeted this.
Congratulations, Rishi Sunak, on becoming Prime Minister and making history as the first British Asian Prime Minister.
But he went on to say, the Tories have crashed the economy with low wages, high prices and a cost of living crisis. So the public needs a fresh start and a say on Britain's future. I think, Olivia, who's still with us in the studio, that may still be an indication that they are pushing for a general election. I mean, they're not going to get it now, are they? Surely the Tories are going to want to try and get to the end of this 2-year period they've got.
I think, yes, they will definitely be looking to get to the end of this 2-year period. And I think that over the last couple of days, we finally have seen the Tory party begin to unite around Rishi Sunak. And the fact that, you know, some of those huge names from the left and the right of the party, from Jeremy Hunt to Suella Braverman, both backed Rishi Sunak, suggests that the Tories, with electoral oblivion really in their eyesight, have focused their minds. That said, we've been talking about what happens when Rishi Sunak puts his cabinet together, and it is quite possible that lots of people are going to be very, very angry, as well as having to get people from all of the different factions around the table. Rishi Sunak, unlike some of his predecessors, will be determined to get the very best people for the job. So there will be those who feel as though, for whatever reason, they are owed a job from Rishi Sunak and won't get one. So although the party seems pretty united now, it could be that unity is miles wide but inches deep.
And there are flashpoints to come in terms of policy. Will there be a relaxation of immigration rules? That will be controversial in the party. Not increasing defence spending to the promised 3%. That would be controversial. Will benefits rise in line with prices? Another big decision. Do you have any inkling on where he is on things like that?
Well, one of the most astonishing things I've found about both this leadership contest and the one before it, which wasn't very long ago, is how little we heard from anyone about their stance on domestic issues. We've heard so much about taxation and the economy, but very little about what anyone thinks about anything else. I think that Rishi Sunak has said that he's supportive of the Rwanda policy. Is he actually, or is that something that he's just said to sort of butter up the right of the party? He's a very pragmatic man, and as far as we can see, the Rwanda policy doesn't actually work particularly well. Will he stick with that?
And is that his Achilles heel? I mean, he's got experience as a hedge fund manager and a banker, but very little experience of other government departments or ministerial positions. And he's still relatively young, so the critics say he may have to rely quite heavily on this new cabinet that he puts together. Yeah,
I think that's true. And I think we're getting a few indications of what he might do. There's talk that, for example, yes, he won't increase defence spending to 3%, which, for one thing, would very much annoy Ben Wallace, who is a hugely popular figure among the Tory grassroots. It's also possible, not saying probable, but possible, that he'll decide to reverse the triple lock, that he will decide...
Really? Do you think he'd go that far?
That's what's being rumoured, but by no means certain. The other thing is obviously benefits. Will he raise them in line with inflation? Not entirely sure. But apart from the what, we're going to have to see some sort of why from Rishi Sunak. Liz Truss, obviously, there were many, many things wrong with her tenure, as we've discussed, but she did have a narrative. She had a plan for growth, and that's what we knew what she was aiming for, even if she didn't know how to get there. I think a bit of a worry with Rishi Sunak might be that he puts together a load of perfectly sensible policies. He looks at the books, he talks to some very clever people, but there isn't really a narrative. And then you get to general election time, and you wonder why would anyone actually vote Conservative?
Well, we're going to stay with you all through the show, Olivia. You are not leaving our side with your brilliant analysis. But we're now going to speak to Matt Vickers, the Conservative MP for Stockton South, one of those red wall seats that the Conservatives won back, actually. They have won your seat previously. He wants to unite the party. How can he do that when your former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, doesn't even have the grace to wish him well?
I think, do you know what we've seen? We've seen him elected, appointed by our parliamentary party unanimously. You know, we've got behind him. If you'd been in that room yesterday when the 1922 met, you would see the warmth with which we welcome this man, because we know he's got the skills, we know he's got the intellect, we know he's got the commitment to get on with the job and deliver in what are very, very tough times.
And clearly he's saying that economic stability, integrity, professionalism, accountability needed to get that through. That would indicate he doesn't think that was actually in government before.
I think, do you know what? We've had some of the toughest and most trying of times in government, all of the challenges that have come our way. I was elected in 2019. I didn't foresee the COVID pandemic. I didn't see the war in Ukraine. I didn't see all of these things coming down. And to be honest, he's took on a big job today, has Rishi Sunak. It's probably one of the most challenging situations that a Prime Minister can come to office, I think. And I think he's the right guy for the job. And in fact, the parliamentary party behind me think he's the man for the job. So let's see what he's got to offer.
And he talks about tough decisions which need to be made to restore economic credibility. It is possible that your constituents won't like some of those tough decisions. If they're cutting public services, for example, if they're not raising benefits in line with inflation, if they're not keeping defence spending rising at a sufficient rate, what advice would you give him? What do your voters want him to do when it comes to the economy?
I think, do you know what? I think Boris is. I think Rishi is the man for the job. He understands the setting. He understands the situation. He's had the keys to that economy for some time before, and he rose to the challenge. He delivered for the most vulnerable people in society, and I think he's the guy for the job now.
Now, I
think people in my patch also understand they don't want.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was saying you're Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party as well, and clearly one of the first things he's got to do now is put this cabinet together. Big tent cabinet is one of the phrases that we've heard. I'm not quite sure what that means, but clearly he's got to be very careful how he sort of gets the One Nation, the ERG, all these various groups together, bearing in mind he's not got perhaps the support of a lot of party faithful. They've not had a chance to vote for him this time.
Do you know what? I was the deputy chair of the party and chose not to go with that, not to take an appointment in the Liz Truss government. But do you know what? What we saw yesterday was a unanimous party coming together, all wings of that party, some of the biggest beasts in our party. And in the end, Boris decided not to run. Penny's got behind him. Everybody's got behind him. They know that Rishi is the man for the job, and we're going to get on with it.
So we sort of know Rishi Sunak because he's been in such a prominent position. But I'm sure you can tell us more about him. You know him personally. You will see him in the tea room. He's your colleague. Is there anything that we might not know about Rishi Sunak?
Do you know what? Well, so I was Rishi's agent in 2014 before he even became an MP. I've got to see him work his way through into being an MP and the jobs that he's done down here. And actually, I learned very quickly that he was a guy who was very committed to the job, who was up to whatever it might take, and a guy with incredible intellect. You know, he arrived in North Yorkshire, went out with farmers. By the end of the day, he was the guy who knew everything about farming, knows the challenges that those people faced. He was a guy who wanted to understand the world around him and wanted to make a difference. And I'm sure that is what he's going to do as Prime Minister.
Well, clearly a lot of people behind you getting excited at this particular event as well. But looking forward now with the job in hand, Sir Christopher Chope saying, you know, you should be going to the country, try and settle all this for once. But, I mean, that might mean annihilation for you. So does he have the full 2 years, and can he get the economy back on track in that period?
If anybody can get the economy back on track, it's Rishi. I think the last thing this country wants now is a general election. We went through the summer with a leadership debate. Now it's time to get on with the job, get it done. There's all sorts of challenges there, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's the upheaval in our economy. We need to get on with the job, focus on it and deliver for the people of this country.
Matt Vickers, thanks very much indeed for your time. And I remember you telling me that Rishi Sunak, this was when he was a mere Chancellor, really loves Maryland choc chip cookies. So hopefully he's got a packet in there in number 10 today.
I'll take him a packet over. I'm sure he'll love it.
Excellent.
Right,
the camera's on the front door, so we'll check that you've delivered them safely. Thanks very much indeed.
Because,
OK. Well, we were talking about Boris Johnson. Some congratulations for the new Prime Minister from Prime Minister or former Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Who said, congratulations to Rishi Sunak on this historic day. This is the moment for every Conservative to give our new Prime Minister their full and wholehearted support.
He must have been
It took a while. It took a while, Olivia, didn't it?
Like blood from a stone, that feels like. And I think there'll be some Boris Johnson supporters who will take that tone and will put their weight behind Rishi Sunak now. We've already seen James Cleverly, for example, but you do, and Nadhim Zahawi as well, some big beasts who threw their weight behind Rishi at the very last moment. But you slightly wonder if those sort of cabinet members know which side their bread's buttered and have defected, as it were, to Rishi Sunak in the hope of keeping cabinet positions. The backbenchers who supported Boris Johnson, the ones who aren't particularly interested in cabinet positions, the sort of rogue backbenchers along the lines of Christopher Chope, Edward Lee, a couple of others, they are the ones who are going to cause problems for Rishi Sunak. So even if Boris Johnson takes a step back and decides that he would rather have a quiet life, making lots of money, and leave the difficult stuff to Rishi Sunak, that's by no means are the Johnsonites disappearing in this parliament.
Yeah. Let's put you in number 10, behind that desk, putting your cabinet together. What do you do about Penny Mordaunt?
Well, Penny Mordaunt, apparently I've heard that she's been angling for Foreign Secretary.
Right.
But Rishi Sunak made the probably quite sensible decision not to start dishing out cabinet positions while he was still campaigning, because as we learned during the Boris Johnson administration, he was very fond of promising lots of things to lots of different people, and that tied him in huge knots by the time he actually got into Downing Street. Rishi Sunak hasn't done that, apparently, but if he gives Penny Mordaunt a plum position, be it Home Secretary or Foreign Secretary, of course that would keep her supporters happy. But the problem is the man who's already in the job, James Cleverly. James Cleverly is well respected in the membership. He's a suave man. He's a funny man. He's got some charisma, and he's a talented politician. So why do you move him out of the Foreign Office and put Penny Mordaunt in? Same problem in the Home Office. You've got Grant Shapps, probably not who Rishi Sunak would have chosen necessarily as his Home Secretary, but what's the rationale behind moving him? And I think Rishi Sunak, as well as having to get together this unity cabinet, will be aware that he doesn't want too much chopping and changing. Liz Truss's cabinet have only just settled in. They've only just got their feet on the floor. Will he want to change all of that? So the number of... 4D chess is an overused phrase, but that's exactly what Rishi Sunak's facing with his cabinet.
Let's bring in our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's actually down at the Home Office. And Mark, on that particular point, as Olivia was saying, Grant Shapps only just got his feet under the desk, and he's got a very difficult situation to address with immigration, particularly as we may get this pressure now for certain immigration rules to be relaxed to try and get manpower and staffing into the country to help with growth.
Well, yes, and this was a plank of policy that actually Suella Braverman, in her very short time in office here at the Home Office, was opposed to. There was 570,000 migrants that came to the UK in the year to June last year, 330,000 left. So the net migration total was about 235,000 people to the UK. Now that is a city the size of Derby or Wolverhampton pretty much every year that has, of course, strains on the infrastructure of this country. And one of the reasons why Suella Braverman wasn't just determined to get to grips with the small boat crisis and the 38-odd thousand people that have come across in small boats this year so far, but also the issue of legal migration and the fact that she believed that it shouldn't be expanded any further than it is at the moment because it brings with it problems. But we know that under Liz Truss's plans, it was seen as a way of stimulating the economy and boosting growth. Will that be the direction of travel for Rishi Sunak? It may well be. So Suella Braverman, you would think, would not be coming back to the Home Office. Grant Shapps has just taken up the reins here and says there's lots he wants to do. Interestingly, the Home Secretary, 2 Home Secretaries ago, Priti Patel, has just tweeted to wish Rishi Sunak congratulations and called for everyone to unite around the new leader. Could she be offered a job back in Cabinet? Well, very possibly. It is, of course, a real headache and an opportunity, of course, for Rishi Sunak to shape that Cabinet, to get the people in place that he thinks are best suited to really do things positively for this country. Olivia was mentioning James Cleverly. He was tweeting, incidentally, saying that it should be a cabinet of all the talents, that you want your first team in place. In other words, please don't sack me just because I supported Boris Johnson. But, you know, he makes a valid point as well. The Foreign Secretary at the moment grappling with some very serious international crises, including, of course, that war that's raging in Ukraine. And then you've got the Defence Secretary. Well, he indicated that he was supporting Boris Johnson, but he is widely respected and seen as doing a very good job within defence at a very difficult time.
He also referred to his promise to create safer streets in that speech that he made before he entered that black door. That means more policing to most people, but we've got these huge spending pressures and this black hole. So how do you deliver safer streets without spending more money on police officers?
Yeah, you're right. Well, the government previously, anyway, under Boris Johnson and then again reaffirmed by Liz Truss, was committed to 20,000 additional frontline police officers by March of next year. And they say they are on target to deliver those extra officers. We have yet to hear, given all of the issues that you mentioned in terms of what Rishi Sunak has got to do to try to right the economy again and also try to get savings out of all government departments effectively. Will they still go for that target? Well, they have a very significant problem with serious and violent crime in this country, which is still far too high. Again, this morning, reports of 2 people shot dead in East London and another critically injured. Just around the corner in Tufton Street, an hour ago, a group of Just Stop Oil protesters have sprayed the front of a building linked to the oil and gas sector. That's another issue that the new Home Secretary has got to grapple with, pushing through that legislation to ensure that these very disruptive protests may not be violent, but they're causing huge disruption, particularly in the capital city, that they can be addressed as a matter of urgency. Pretty much every government department you go to, there are very significant issues that they're grappling with. It is not an easy job, 12 years in to a Conservative administration, to try to breathe new life into this government and to try to deal with all of the many competing issues that demand some kind of urgent redress.
Mark, at the Home Office, thank you for that. More, of course, as we get those cabinet appointments. But just to update you here on GB Newsday, as we see a lot of tidying up going on in Downing Street, Rishi Sunak is now behind that door. He is our new Prime Minister, and the cabinet appointments will be following this afternoon. We'll have the runners and riders for you. Let's take a short break first. Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints, over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Britain has a new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is behind the most famous black door in the world, number 10 Downing Street. What an in tray he has. To talk us through it is GB News political reporter Olivia Utley is with us, nice and warm in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, his in tray, as we know, is enormous. He's got energy problems to deal with. He's got the economy to deal with. He's got the war in Ukraine to deal with. I mean, let's start with energy. He's got to decide what to do in the short term. He's got to decide how far to extend the package, the energy support package.
Which runs out in April, just to remind people.
Which runs out in April, as far as Jeremy Hunt has said. But that this fiscal event, which is happening next Monday, very soon indeed, will make it clearer what exactly is going to happen there. Obviously, the bits of the mini-budget that were most criticised were the 45p tax cut.
Rate, yeah.
But actually, the thing that was most expensive was the energy support package. And the Liz Truss administration liked to talk about how it was more generous than almost any other package in the developed world. Well, that's a bit of a problem for a government where funds are very low.
Yeah, he may have some wriggle room, though, because the wholesale gas prices are actually falling. So as they're trying to do the number crunching for this October the 31st, it might be slightly later, a couple of days later, we're now hearing, he's got perhaps a slightly better picture to deal with there.
A slightly better picture, yes, but by no means ideal. Yeah. And he's going to be very deeply worried about that. I think the other thing is that although him and Jeremy Hunt are sort of from the same wing of the party, they're both interested in living within our means and are sort of fiscal conservatives, they're not exactly the same. There's a very interesting piece by Fraser Nelson, who knows both men well, in the Telegraph, I think it was, yesterday, highlighting that Jeremy Hunt is really a sort of markets man. He's determined to keep things... make sure the market's happy at every stage of the way and will make sure that all of the numbers add up, sort of abacus politics, as it were. Rishi Sunak is interested in governing by keeping the markets happy through competence. So he might not be quite as concerned as Jeremy Hunt as making sure every single number adds up. So there could be a bit of tension there, although it's pretty certain that Jeremy Hunt is going to keep his job. They don't see absolutely eye to eye on the economy.
Right, but obviously they're not going to try and upset the apple cart at the moment. Let's just break in. We're just getting a bit more breaking news coming in terms of the congratulations coming in with a certain Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine, who has officially congratulated Rishi Sunak in his past few minutes. In his tweet, he said, "Congratulations to Rishi on taking office as Prime Minister, ! I wish you to successfully overcome all the challenges facing British society and the whole world today. I'm ready to continue strengthening the strategic partnership together," another exclamation mark.
So we have gained a new Prime Minister today, which means we lost the last one. She had a short tenure. She gave a speech outside number 10 on her departure. It was pretty defiant. Let's have a listen.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy. We are taking back our energy independence, so we are never again beholden to global market fluctuations or malign foreign powers. From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold and confront the challenges that we face. As the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, it's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult. We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country where the government takes up an increasing share of our national wealth and where there are huge divides between different parts of our country. We need to take advantage of our Brexit freedoms to do things differently. This means delivering more freedom for our own citizens and restoring power to democratic institutions. It means lower taxes so people can keep more of the money that they earn. And it means delivering growth that will lead to more job security, higher wages, and greater opportunities for our children and grandchildren. Democracies must be able to deliver for their own people. We must be able to outcompete autocratic regimes where power lies in the hands of a few. And now more than ever, we must support Ukraine in their brave fight against Putin's aggression. Ukraine must prevail, and we must continue to strengthen our nation's defences. That's what I have been striving to achieve, and I wish Rishi Sunak every success for the good of our country. I want to thank Hugh, Francis, Liberty, my family and friends, and all the team at Number 10 for their love, friendship and support. I also want to thank my protection team. I look forward to spending more time in my constituency and continuing to serve South West Norfolk from the backbenches. Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people, and I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
Liz Truss departing Number 10 just 6.5 weeks since she arrived.
And an extra 3 minutes, 7 seconds for the speech, as opposed to Rishi Sunak, who was 5 minutes, 56 seconds. So that was then, and this is now. All the latest coming up, of course, with a new cabinet on the way. We'll have the runners and riders view, but let's get the latest news headlines first.
Good morning, it's 12:34. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is the country's new Prime Minister after meeting with the King at Buckingham Palace. Addressing the country outside Downing Street for the first time, he said the country is facing a profound economic crisis. He paid tribute to his predecessor Liz Truss, but said some mistakes were made. Earlier, King Charles invited Mr Sunak to form a new government, confirming him as Prime Minister. Well, speaking outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions to come as he pledged to place economic stability at the heart of his government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them.
Well, earlier, Liz Truss bid farewell to Number 10, saying brighter days lie ahead as she urged the incoming Prime Minister to be bold. In her final speech from Downing Street, she praised her government, adding they had acted urgently and decisively as she spoke of cutting taxes.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills, and help thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
World leaders have congratulated Rishi Sunak on becoming the UK's new Prime Minister. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden are among those who've welcomed the news. President Zelensky says he's ready to strengthen the partnership between the two countries. Meanwhile, Russia says they don't expect relations between Britain and the Kremlin to improve. In other news now, a human rights activist is believed to have been arrested in Qatar after staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in any Gulf state. A video appears to show Peter Tatchell being approached by police officers outside a museum in Doha. This comes just 26 days before the Football World Cup is due to take place in the country. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness, mate.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. So, Rishi Sunak is in number 10, our latest new Prime Minister, and with a groaning in tray. What, of course, does he do about the economy? Well, joining us now, Jim Pickard, who's Chief Political Editor at the Financial Times. And, Jim, he's got some big numbers to deal with. And just reflecting on what Sir David Ramsden, Bank of England Deputy Governor, is saying, credibility is being recovered, but that has to be followed through, and it could be quite difficult following through on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're expecting this fiscal statement on Monday. We did think that it was going to include £40 billion worth of tax rises and spending cuts. There'll be an attempt to delay some of that pain by taking certain fiscal restraint measures and delaying them for a couple of years. So, for example, if you take income tax, the thresholds on that have already been frozen. You could freeze them for another couple more years and therefore deliver the pain in a less explicit, immediate way. But there is going to be a very painful statement on Monday. The only one thing I would say is that gilt yields have fallen ever so slightly today, I think by 20 basis points. And actually the gilt yield is back to where we were before Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget. And what that means is that, incredibly, that will save them a few £1 billion from those savings and cuts that need to be made on Monday. But that doesn't mean that they don't still have a very difficult decision-making process ahead of them. And we still don't even know if Jeremy Hunt, the current Chancellor, who was brought in the dying days of the Truss administration, is still going to even be there on Monday. We think he probably is the favourite to be Chancellor. We're expecting a reshuffle this afternoon. Watch that space.
Who else do you think will be in that top team? And any sense of when we'll find out for sure? Will we see the conventional traipsing up and down Downing Street, or will it be a little less dramatic than the norm?
I mean, I think everything Sunak is trying to do today is to make everything less dramatic. So when you watched his statement a few minutes ago, he was basically on his own. His wife and family were not there. There wasn't the usual kind of knot of supportive Tory MPs around him. He was very, very serious. He looked as if he'd been ordered not to do any smiling at all. And I think the reshuffle will be conducted in a very similar, sober kind of way. In terms of who we expect to be coming into the cabinet, I think you'll see certain supporters like Oliver Dowden, Mel Stride, certain people who weren't natural Sunak supporters but who came in behind him over the weekend, like Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman. I would expect cabinet positions for some of those people. But at the same time, I was chatting to some senior Sunak supporting MPs yesterday who were saying he doesn't want to make the mistake that Liz Truss made when she won in early September, which was basically to fill the cabinet with her pals and people who'd supported her. He does want to make overtures to some former supporters of Boris Johnson and Penny Mordaunt to try and make the whole Conservative team look a little bit more unified and less like a kind of one-person fan club.
And looking at the number crunching, Jim, we're just learning that the government says it's going to publish a review into the operation of its energy bill relief scheme. I mean, on the bigger picture, wholesale gas prices are actually falling. So does he and Jeremy Hunt, if of course he stays as Chancellor, have a bit more wriggle room now?
I mean, Liz Truss basically gave them the wriggle room along with Hunt a few days ago when they said that the original energy support scheme was going to be over 2 years. The estimates of that were obviously quite hard to pin down, but people thought it was going to cost about £150 billion, more or less. What's £10 billion here or there between friends? That was the original estimate of the original scheme. Under the pared-back scheme, the support for households will end after 6 months, along with the support for businesses, and from there on they can do a more tailored support scheme. But the problem with that is that although obviously you'd have thought they're going to help, if they're saying they're helping more vulnerable people, they can help the 8 million or so households that are on universal credit. But that means you still have a dilemma over whether to provide support for the squeezed middle, middle class, middle England, people who may be, bringing home reasonable salaries, but with mortgages going up, they can ill afford to deal with a sudden increase in their energy bills next year. So that's one of the biggest issues that they're going to have to face. They don't have to decide that one by Monday's fiscal event, but they're going to need to sort that out in the next few months. Which businesses, which households are they going to provide support for, and at what level beyond April?
The opposition parties will be figuring out how they can attack him. He has a very wealthy wife. Is that above or below the political belt?
So it's funny you ask that, because I've been talking to people in the shadow cabinet, advisors to Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves this morning about where Labour's tactics are going to be on this. And I think the issue of family wealth is an interesting one, because the Sunak family are stratospherically wealthy. Not only did he marry into a hugely wealthy dynasty, his wife is the daughter of the founder of Infosys, this enormous Indian tech company, but he himself made hundreds of millions of pounds when he was working at Goldman Sachs, when he was working at a hedge fund. He is a self-made man in his own right. And I think Labour are a little bit squeamish at going after them just for the fact that they're well off, because this more moderate Labour leadership doesn't want to look like it's anti-aspiration. But I think the non-dom status of Rishi Sunak's wife is something where she agreed earlier this year to pay more tax than she was previously paying in the UK. I think she is still technically a non-dom, and I think Labour will go for that. They'll also go for the fact that Rishi Sunak, until recently, did have a green card to live and work in America. That's been removed as well. His team have said that was some kind of oversight, but I think they're more likely to go for those kind of attacks than just on the simple, they've made loads of money and therefore you, the voters, should somehow resent this.
Jim Pickard of the Financial Times, always brilliant to get your analysis, thank you.
Taxing times for everyone, including the Prime Minister and his wife, it seems. Now, during one of his first conversations with MPs after being appointed as party leader, Rishi Sunak said that his party must unite or die.
Remember that the 80-seat majority that Boris Johnson delivered was by securing many, many seats that had, for time immemorial, voted Labour. Well, what's the view of Rishi Sunak in those seats? Will Hollis, our Will Hollis, our East Midlands reporter, has been to my former constituency of Ashfield. I'm dying to know what the mood is there in... Oh, are you in Kirkby? Are you in Kirkby in Ashfield, Will?
No.
Oh, Sutton,
no,
you're in Sutton?
I'm in Sutton in Ashfield today, Gloria.
You are. What's the mood, Will?
Yes, well, of course, if you cast your mind back 3 years, it might not seem like a very long time, but a lot has happened in those 3 years, and that big chunky 80-seat majority that was so essential for the Conservatives to win in 2019. A lot of that chunky majority came from places like this, Ashfield, with towns like Sutton in Ashfield, like Kirkby in Ashfield, where people would traditionally vote Labour because there's traditionally a mining community and industrial community in any of these red wall seats. And in 2019, it really was the double-barreled B that people were voting for. They were voting for Brexit, but they were also voting for Mr. Boris Johnson. So you can understand why today, when we were speaking to people here in Sutton and Ashfield, they were maybe a little bit less than satisfied to see that it wasn't Boris Johnson who was the Prime Minister again, but instead Rishi Sunak.
No, I don't want him. I want Boris back. I think he should have stayed and we should have let him finish what he started. I really do. I mean, I don't think anybody could have done a better job. I know there were a lot of backlash and things like that, and he made a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying he didn't. But the recession and everything, I don't think anybody could have got us through the pandemic the way he did.
As normal people, where we come from and stuff, I think it would be more beneficial for the high-end people, you know. So I don't think it's going to benefit us in any way. But we'll see.
When he took the 5p off the fuel, if it's his reality, because he's so wealthy, is he really going to be for the people, or is it going to just be more wealthy people as such?
That's it, really. We should have had a choice in everything, and we haven't, and it feels like people are just being ignored.
Yes, well, when we saw Rishi Sunak making that first address outside of number 10 Downing Street, he did mention three things that are going to be quite key for people in places like Ashfield. He mentioned Brexit. 70% of people here voted for Brexit. He also mentioned armed forces, veterans. If you could see the streets around us, there are poppies because, of course, it is Remembrance Sunday in the near future. And finally, he mentioned... can't remember what the final thing he was mentioned because some young boy just screamed at me as he was driving past. But of course, big things like Brexit, of course it was levelling up. He mentioned levelling up. And we know that because of the tough decisions that he's going to have to make towards taxes and the decisions that he's going to have to make in the near future, levelling up maybe pushed back a little bit further than how high it was on Boris Johnson's agenda. Of course, the next election won't be until probably January 2025. And if it was Rishi Sunak who was still the Prime Minister of the party, the leader of the Conservative Party at that particular time, there are two things that he doesn't have that Boris Johnson had. He doesn't have a fancy slogan like Get Brexit Done, and he doesn't have Jeremy Corbyn in charge of the Labour Party, which one person who was here in Sutton and Ashfield this morning told me was the main reason why people turned away from the Labour Party.
Excellent to hear those voices and also to see the joys of lives during school half-term.
Yeah, half-term in Sutton, yeah, indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Bit of breaking news, Olivia, coming through.
Well, pretty expected, but breaking news nonetheless. Jacob Rees-Mogg has resigned from the government. Jacob Rees-Mogg was a very loyal ally of both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and he was widely expected not to be in Rishi Sunak's cabinet. I think the fact that he's resigning, it can sometimes be a bit of a hostile move, but in this case, actually, it seems as though he's being quite helpful to Rishi Sunak. He once called Rishi Sunak our former lamented socialist chancellor, and which was obviously quite a barb. But in the last couple of days, he's actually been very helpful to him. And I think this is a sign that the Tory party is pretty united. And it's quite useful for Rishi Sunak as well, because it creates some space in his cabinet, which is exactly what he needs. Yeah. He's going to need to get so many people from so many different factions and so many different reasons why he's got to appoint all sorts of different people. So I think any spaces that can be made will be very welcome to him. Could see someone like Oliver Dowden, perhaps a very loyal supporter of Rishi Sunak's. A very competent minister, was popular in DCMS, clever man, writes well. I commissioned him at the Telegraph. Never had to edit anything. So that could be a go.
Michael Gove, another former journalist. What's going to be happening about him?
Well, I think it's quite likely that Michael Gove gets moved over to health.
Really?
I think it's possible. Rishi Sunak and Michael Gove have always got on pretty well, and Rishi Sunak, I hear, is privately very keen on serious NHS reform. And in the Treasury, he talked about how putting more and more money into the NHS wasn't the answer, and how getting
structural reform,
right, digital reform is very important. And Gove is a man who can be counted on to deliver.
Oh, we've got lots of chats about who's going to be in and who's going to be out as we go through the afternoon. But now we can cross live to GB News South East of England reporter Ellie Costello. She is at the Conservative Club in... Ellie, you're at a Conservative club in Hornchurch. Hornchurch was the word I was looking for there. Ellie, what's the mood down there?
Hello, yes, good afternoon to you both. Well, it's very busy in here today at Hornchurch Conservative Club. We've got lots of people here getting their drinks. We've got tea and coffee in the corner over there, but also some people on beer and wine as well. Very, very busy. Lots of talk, of course, about our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And I'm here to take the temperature, if you will, as to what they think of him as our new Prime Minister. He is, of course, the 57th Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, the third in as many months. It's been an astonishing time for British politics. Well, I want to bring in now Bob Perry, who is the former chairman of Hornchurch and Upminster Conservatives, and also a former Conservative Chancellor. So good afternoon to you, Bob, and thank you so much for your time. First of all, Rishi Sunak, what do you make of his first speech? We watched it together here, didn't we?
We did. I think it was what I expected to hear. Disappointed that he thought that he paid tribute to Liz Truss, but that's another matter. But I like the fact that he's bringing back integrity and trust into the party, and I think he's capable of doing it.
And what do you make of the last 7 weeks in particular for the Conservative Party? I mean, how have you reacted to what we've been seeing at 10 Downing Street?
Absolute shambles, and I think the rest of the country has seen it the same way, and people abroad as well.
Can Rishi fix this? Is Rishi the man for it? Do you support him?
I like Rishi, but I don't like the fact that he was appointed rather than elected. I think the members should have had a say, and I think they're making their voices clear by the resignations that's been going on since.
And what do you make of people that say that this is a very, very rich man now, richer than the royal family now? We're not even sure if he's going to be living in number 10. Do you think wealth comes into it?
No, I think his experience in finance is what matters here, and I think that's where he will do the right things for the financial decisions for the country.
We've just heard news there, breaking news, that Jacob Rees-Mogg has resigned. I think we are going to see a lot of movement this afternoon. We're going to hear more and more announcements about the new cabinet. Who do you think should be in it?
I'd like to see Ben Wallace stay as Defence Secretary. And I'd like to see Sajid Javid come back as Chancellor, because I think he did a good job, and I think he'll do a good job again.
And Jacob Rees-Mogg, the right move to go?
Jacob resigning doesn't surprise me, because he's very loyal to Boris. Not a fan of Rishi, so I think he's done what's right for him.
There are so many factions in the Conservative Party right now. It's what we've seen over the last 7 weeks in particular. Can this be fixed, or are we heading towards a general election a lot closer than 2 years' time?
No, I think it can be fixed, and I think Rishi is very capable of doing it. The party now realise that they just cannot have this chaos anymore. And if they don't sort it, then there will be a general election. But personally, I think it will go to 24.
So your message is give Rishi Sunak a chance?
Yes, I would say definitely give Rishi a chance. I think he'll do a good job, but only time will tell.
What does he need to do, in your opinion, to do a good job? What should be at the top of his agenda?
He said it himself, trust, restore trust. But he needs to restore the public's trust, not just the party's trust.
Bob Perry, really, really good to speak to you. That's Bob Perry there, the former chairman of Hornchurch and Upminster Conservatives and also a former Conservative councillor. Those are his opinions, but there is no denying that Rishi Sunak is going to have a very, very full in tray. We've got the energy bills crisis, we have the cost of living, of course, Putin's war in Ukraine as well. It is a huge, huge mammoth task ahead of him, and it's going to be a very busy afternoon. We're going to be hearing about this new cabinet. But the message here is give Rishi Sunak a chance.
Ellie in Hornchurch, thank you very much indeed for that. And another thing he's going to have to do is fill the business secretary's position because, as Ellie was telling us there, the breaking news, Jacob Rees-Mogg has left the government, stepping down as the business secretary. A source close to him saying to Press Association he knows he was very close to the previous two regimes, as they say, and it didn't seem likely he was going to be appointed in the new cabinet.
So that clears a space for Rishi Sunak, and we hope to get details of the reshuffle. We'll certainly get it today. It is underway. It's just a question of when exactly we will get the names and the jobs. Your views on Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister?
Well, Ellery first saying, had Boris Johnson not been so shambolic, unprofessional and slapdash, he might still be in Downing Street. It's not surprising that Sunak, who is ultra-professional and businesslike and with close attention to detail, became frustrated with him. They have very different dispositions. It's now in Britain's best interest that Sunak succeeds.
Ray says Mr Sunak is responsible for the financial crisis that we are in. He ran the finances of this country as Chancellor under Boris. It's not Boris's fault. He was being advised by Sunak. He has to turn this around as it's his doing. He won't be a hero. He's just correcting his mistakes. Good luck. He needs it.
Christopher's been in touch to say Rishi Sunak pleads integrity. Stabbing a sitting PM in the back is not an act of integrity. That is sheer hypocrisy. No wonder the members are leaving in droves. Keep those views coming. GBviews at gbnews.uk. And, of course, we'll reflect your position throughout the afternoon.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello and welcome once more to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. Rishi Sunak is officially Prime Minister, having been formally appointed by His Majesty the King this morning at Buckingham Palace.
Well, he made his first speech in Downing Street, 5 minutes 56 seconds, And that's one of the longest delivered by a newly appointed Prime Minister in recent times.
In his speech, he vowed to fix the mistakes made by previous Prime Minister Liz Truss and insisted he was not daunted by the challenges facing the country. Throughout the programme, we'll be bringing you all the latest reaction to his appointment and looking ahead to his cabinet appointments expected this afternoon after the latest news.
Good afternoon. It's 1:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to fix what he called the mistakes of Liz Truss's leadership. Addressing the country outside Downing Street for the first time in his new role, he said the nation should be braced for difficult decisions ahead. Earlier, King Charles invited Mr Sunak to form a new government, confirming him as Prime Minister. Speaking outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions to come as he pledged to place economic stability at the heart of his government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them.
Earlier, Liz Truss bid farewell to Number 10, saying brighter days lie ahead as she urged the incoming Prime Minister to be bold. In her final speech from Downing Street, she praised her government, adding they had acted urgently and decisively as she spoke of cutting taxes.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
Rishi Sunak has arrived at the House of Commons, where it's expected he'll begin his cabinet reshuffle. Some departures have already happened, with Jacob Rees-Mogg resigning as the business secretary. It follows a number of fellow MPs sending their congratulations to the newly appointed Prime Minister, including Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer. World leaders have congratulated Rishi Sunak on becoming the new Prime Minister. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden are among those who've welcomed the news. President Zelensky says he's ready to strengthen the partnership between the two countries. Meanwhile, Russia says they don't expect relations between Britain and the Kremlin to improve. In other news, new figures show the price of low-cost everyday grocery items like pasta, tea and cooking oil have soared. The Office for National Statistics says budget items have increased in cost by around 17% over the last 12 months. It comes as inflation is at a 40-year high, with prices up 10.1% in a year. Food prices drove the latest rise in living costs in September, along with energy bills and transport costs. A human rights activist is believed to have been arrested in Qatar after staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in any Gulf state. A video appears to show Peter Tatchell being approached by a police officer outside the National Museum in Doha. This comes just 26 days before the Football World Cup is due to take place in the country. Royal Mail workers are striking today for 24 hours in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. It's the latest in a series of industrial action taken by members of the Communication Workers Union. The CWU says its Royal Mail members have had an unagreed 2% pay deal imposed on them at a time when inflation is in double figures. An investigation is underway after 2 men have been killed in a shooting in London. Officers were called to Henley Road in Ilford in the early hours of this morning, following reports of a fight and shots being fired. They found 3 men with gunshot injuries. A man in his 20s was pronounced dead at the scene, while another died a short time later. The 3rd victim was taken to hospital and remains in a critical condition. No arrests have been made. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Mark and Gloria.
And welcome back to GB Newsday, where we have a new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is in number 10 Downing Street, and already he is starting to reposition his government with the cabinet changes. We understand that there are changes afoot. Olivia Utley is with us in the studio with some breaking news on the latest musical chairs.
Yes, Brandon Lewis has resigned as Justice Secretary. I've just read the letter that he sent to Rishi Sunak. Doesn't really say a huge amount beyond going what he's done in the Justice brief. He's considered a sort of capable and competent minister. He's pretty experienced. But again, I actually think it's quite helpful for Rishi Sunak that he's resigned, because it gives Sunak space to appoint his own cabinet and put his own mark on his premiership. I think who he puts in Justice will be very, very important, actually, because, as mentioned earlier in the show, we're not quite sure where Rishi Sunak stands on a host of domestic issues, including justice, all elements of justice. We've obviously got very unhappy barristers who've been on strike recently. We've got overcrowded prisons. We've got people very concerned about safety on the streets, prisoners not being locked up in the eyes of some social conservatives for long enough. So I think who Rishi Sunak puts in that position, whether it's Suella Braverman or Priti Patel, a social conservative like that, or someone in the One Nation wing of the party, will be very interesting and important.
And very quickly, also Jacob Rees-Mogg out as Business Secretary, so that's another piece of the jigsaw that they'll have to move around.
Yeah, again, I think quite helpful. It'll probably give Rishi Sunak space to put in one of his own loyal supporters, perhaps in that important role as Business Secretary. He'll have to decide what to do about fracking. That'll probably be the most urgent concern. Rishi Sunak has supported lifting the ban on fracking, but hasn't been particularly vocal about it. So it'll be interesting to see who he puts there and what he does about that very live issue.
Olivia, thanks very much indeed.
Well, the economy, when Rishi Sunak addressed the nation outside number 10, he acknowledged that there would be difficult decisions ahead. Here to break it all down for us, it's Liam Halligan with On the Money.
In his own words, as he stood outside number 10, Rishi Sunak said there would be profound economic challenges that he has to face during his term of office. The former Chancellor is the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years. He was born only in 1980. One of his biggest economic challenges is the cost of living. Inflation. We can see here from this graph that the cost of living is rising very steeply there. From 2020, a huge increase, 10.1% in September 2022. That's how much higher the cost of living was on the year before, and that rate of inflation, 10.1%, that is a 40-year high. But even this eye-watering number belies what's really happening underneath in the nation's shopping baskets. Take a look at some of these figures of some of the goods that are bought most regularly by lower-income households. Vegetable oil in September 21 was £1.56 a litre. It's now £2.58 a litre, according to the Office for National Statistics. That's a 65% rise. Take pasta, which many families use when they want to take money because it's cheap and it's easy to store. Pasta was 38 pence for a half-kilogram bag in September 2021. Last month, it was 61 pence. That's a 60% increase. It's the same story for tea, and crikey, our nation is built on cups of tea. Tea is up 45% over the last year, from 67 pence for a 125-gram bag to 97 pence. And milk as well. That was £1.17 for 4 pints in September 2021. Now it's £1.52. That's a 30% rise. These are the realities of the cost of living squeeze beyond the headline numbers. And as many people who are weathering a mortgage will know, their costs are also going up. Let's have a look at these rising mortgage costs. They've been going up since the beginning of this year. The average mortgage was just just over 3.5% back in January. And it soared to almost 5.5% back in September. That's way, way before the mini-budget. But the market turbulence that was linked to those policies from former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng have caused increased borrowing costs, and now the average mortgage rate is about 6%. And here are the gilt yields, the amount of money the government has to pay when it wants to borrow on a 10-year basis. Back at the end of last week, when there was still looks as if there'd be a tumultuous Tory leadership contest, those gilt yields were 4.1%. Since it's become clear that Rishi Sunak will be Prime Minister, and now is Prime Minister, those borrowing costs have fallen just to 3.7%. And those lower costs of interest, they will ripple across the economy, so mortgages now should start to get a little bit cheaper. The big conundrum, though, of Rishi Sunak's premiership is this: the wholesale price of gas. Gas prices are the real reason that I think financial markets have been so turbulent, because investors are nervous about the government having to pay to subsidise all of us for cheap gas, if only now for 6 months. But just look at this. It's barely remarked upon. Wholesale gas prices have fallen significantly in recent months, from 350 pence, that's £3.50, to just under £1 per kilowatt hour. These numbers are in euros. This is the European wholesale gas market, but the UK is also exposed to these prices. So this graph, arcane as it may seem, does represent a chink of hope when Rishi Sunak tries to balance the government's finances. In sum, this inbox includes higher inflation for Rishi Sunak, higher borrowing costs, and roller coaster energy prices. To that, we could add public sector pay rounds, with a lot of state sector unions pushing for inflation-busting wage rises, with inflation at 10%. We could see, as we go into winter, a series of strikes. Rishi Sunak wasn't even born in the 70s, but the problems he faces in the form of energy costs, the cost of living, and potential industrial action, they are now starting to reflect that most politically explosive of decades.
Liam, thanks very much indeed for that. And of course, Liam will be keeping an eye on the markets for us throughout the afternoon. We'll be keeping an eye on Downing Street.
And we're going to go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, a couple of people have resigned, though promising to support the Prime Minister from the backbenchers, so we know a couple of the people who are going. But who's going to be arriving too?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it, Gloria? First of all, the Prime Minister isn't actually here. He's already left Downing Street and travelled to Parliament, which is just down the roads. It's pretty traditional for the Prime Minister essentially to sack those cabinet ministers or ask them to resign in his office in Parliament, and then invite the new cabinet ministers to walk up one of the most famous streets in the world to accept the invitation to serve in the cabinet. So we know that Jacob Rees-Mogg has left the government. He, of course, was business secretary, a big ally of Boris Johnson, someone who'd been encouraging the former Prime Minister to run over the weekend. And in addition to that, Brandon Lewis is also gone. Now, he, again, was an ally of Boris Johnson, someone who was on the radio most mornings and the TV channels defending the Prime Minister, even in the trickiest of situations. He'd also been quite loyal to Liz Truss as well. He'd moved from being Northern Ireland Secretary to Justice Secretary, but he is now out of the Cabinet too. So that frees up the Justice Department. We could be on our fourth Justice Secretary in the space of a year. I might go as far as to suggest, could Dominic Raab be back in that post? He's been very loyal to Rishi Sunak. You may remember during the summer, he got himself in a bit of bother where he was essentially Sunak's attack dog, suggesting that Liz Truss's economic policies were a suicide note. Though, given how close he is, and given the fact he's a former Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, may he be holding out, for example, to be Foreign Secretary? The other big question is, what does Rishi Sunak do when he talks about the government of all the talents and trying to include all the factions of the Conservative Party in the cabinet? How does he unify people? That means keeping some Boris Johnson supporters, I would suggest, inside cabinet. What do you do with people like James Cleverly, the current Foreign Secretary who backed Boris Johnson? Does he remain in post? But then where does Penny Mordaunt go? He has to reward Penny Mordaunt, doesn't he? she essentially finished second in that kind of non-leadership race we have had. And that's why it's really tricky, these cabinet reshuffles. You think you've sorted out one government department, and then you realise that has a knock-on effect on all the other government departments. But I suspect that Dominic Raab will definitely be back in. Michael Gove, could he be back in at levelling up? I think almost certainly he'll certainly be in the cabinet. What will happen to Gavin Williamson? He's been one of the right-hand men of Rishi Sunak over the last couple of months. He's a big supporter, though he was somewhat seen as a failed education secretary. Mel Stride, who's the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, again a close ally. Will he get a cabinet position? As I say, this is where it gets really, really difficult. Oliver Dowden, will he be back in? Then what do you do with existing cabinet ministers? Kit Malthouse, for example, will he be allowed to remain in his post as education secretary? And Grant Shapps, the Home Secretary, can they afford to change the Home Secretary 3 times in the space of a week? I don't know. He's a pretty good communicator, though he's not always been beside the right-hand side of Rishi Sunak. So these, as I say, really tricky decisions. They would have mapped them out over the last couple of days. Yeah. Those resignations now taking place and firings inside the House of Commons. And then I suspect in the first hour or so, or the next hour or so, I should say, Mark, we will see them walk up Downing Street. I think the one thing we can be certain on is that Jeremy Hunt will almost certainly be Chancellor by the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, we're just learning, as you say, clearly it's all going on, we understand, at the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Office. Former Cabinet Minister Gavin Williamson, who supported, of course, Rishi Sunak, has left the corridor from the PM's office. So whether he's got a new job, we don't know. But let's just reflect on the speech that Rishi Sunak gave outside Number 10 when he spoke of economic stability. I mean, we assume that does mean that Jeremy Hunt will stay as Chancellor in Number 11.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the case. I'm pretty sure he's made that clear that Rishi Sunak, or that certainly people close to him, that Jeremy Hunt is going to remain in Number 11. He's made a pretty good fist, hasn't he, over the last 10 days or so. Is it 10 days? I think it's about 10 days since he's been Chancellor. The market's had somewhat steadied under him. He's obviously been working on that medium-term fiscal plan that we think may well be delivered by next Monday. So I would have thought the expectation is that he will remain in Number 11. In saying that, as a former Chancellor himself, someone who's obviously worked in the city, someone who has got an economic background, as Rishi Sunak has, at the end of the day, these fundamentally big decisions are the Prime Minister's decision, and I would have thought that he'll be working pretty closely with Jeremy Hunt, but in the end, it will be Rishi Sunak signing off these big decisions, not simply the Treasury. In terms of the speech, though, as you say, it was a speech that talked about the mistakes of the Conservative Party. The main sell from Rishi Sunak was fundamentally him arguing he was a serious politician for serious times that needed to win back the trust of the Conservative Party and most notably the British public.
We'll speak to you throughout the afternoon. Thank you for that. Let's speak now to Conservative MP for Bury North. That was a seat won at the last election by the Conservatives from Labour. It is James Daly. James Daly, good to see you. Just tell us how and whether the mood has changed of Conservative MPs just between last week when Liz Truss was there and today as you have a new Prime Minister.
I think that there is a mood of unity, of togetherness, of shared purpose. I think things have changed since last week. I think people are relieved that leadership has been settled. And I think people, whatever their views, whatever has happened over the last few days, want to come behind Rishi to unite behind his platform and deliver for the country. So the mood has definitely improved with my colleagues.
If this is going to hurt in terms of benefits not going up by inflation, maybe the triple lock not actually being adhered to, all those painful measures, does that really put the red wall seats at some risk?
I think there are clearly challenges, electoral challenges in respect to that, but we've got to do the decisions which are right for the country and right for constituents all across the country. No politician wants to reduce benefits. No politician, certainly that I've met on the Conservative benches, wants to see that triple lock changed. It is an economic reality meeting our responsibility to deliver for people, and as you're quite right, Mark, it's very, very difficult, and there will be difficult decisions coming up, but will be certainly people like me arguing we should be doing everything possible to maintain and to deliver on the promises we've made already.
Jacob Rees-Mogg and Brandon Lewis have left the Cabinet. Do you reckon they jumped before they were pushed?
Listen, Gloria, you know more about these things than me, I'm afraid. I thought that Liam made a very good point, though, about the Justice Secretary brief. One of the question that I asked during the first leadership election, the question I asked Rishi during the hustings was, what was his plan to drive up the charging rate for rape and serious sexual offending against women and girls in our country? We have a charge-out rate of 1%. 99% of rape allegations to the police do not even get to a court. And so I think whoever comes into that justice brief, rather than worrying about what the name is, they've got to get on top of really, really important issues. Our criminal justice system is really teetering at the moment, and there's some really important decisions that are going to have to be made. So I think that appointment will be very, very interesting. I'm a big fan of Dominic Raab. I've worked with him previously. I think he's a good man. I've worked with him at close quarters, and I hope he's brought back to a position at dealing with perhaps some of these matters at either Home Office or in the Justice Department.
And looking at the big picture, it seems that the opposition parties are still pressing for a general election and the whole issue about this not having gone to the country. But do you think you've got 2 years? Because the key is to really turn the economy around, you need that sort of time frame.
You're bang on right, Mark. That's exactly what we've got to do. We've got to deliver. If we don't deliver, if we don't turn the economy around, we're not going to have very many MPs left at the next election. So it's all about delivery. It's all about being focused on the interests of our constituents. We've spent too much time over recent months playing political games down here. And it's got to stop. And we've got the right, serious, competent, capable, credible people now in position who will deliver this for the country. And so, getting back to your question at the top of this, that's why people are relieved. That's why people like me are happy. We've got the people who can deliver on the manifesto we were elected upon and deliver for people in Bury North and throughout the country.
Good to talk to you today, James. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Gloria.
OK, and let's just get the latest with Olivia, just to reflect on what we're expecting in terms of cabinet changes. I mean, we now know that Rishi Sunak is actually in his parliamentary office in Westminster rather than number 10. Does that indicate to you perhaps there'll be rather more comings and goings, that they really want to get the conveyor belt going, if you like?
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. I think it could be that it's all sort of presented in one go. He's not going to want the drama of watching politicians come and go and all the kind of speculation taking place all afternoon. But I thought what James said there about how the names matter less than what these people represent. And I think one problem that Rishi Sunak's going to have to address is that he's become sort of all things to all people. You've got the sort of social conservatives in the party hoping that he's going to up investment because something like prisons and getting a robust justice system needs lots of investment in our institutions. It's quite a different kettle of fish to sort of the small state libertarian Trussite supporters who he's going to have to get on board as well. So I think in who he puts in his cabinet, we're going to see a lot more about the real Rishi Sunak.
And I think the decision that he's taken to conduct this reshuffle from his private office, there are no cameras there. Cameras cannot position themselves on those corridors because, of course, politics is one of the very few jobs where you are fired in a very public way. And I think he's trying to preserve people's dignity by taking this option, which is kind.
Absolutely, and I think it's preserving the whole party's dignity, really. It feels, everything about today feels as though Rishi Sunak is desperately trying to drain the drama out of the situation. It's very, very low-key. Everything is sort of happening behind closed doors as much as is possible. He knows that the sort of farce that we've seen over the last 6 weeks is becoming slightly ridiculous, and he wants to maintain not just his colleagues' dignity, but his party's dignity as well.
Preserving dignity in politics. Now, there's the thing, is it? On that very note, Charlie Rowley's joining us, who was Michael Gove's special advisor, because I've got a list here with question marks about the new cabinet. Dominic Raab, and then I've got number 2, Michael Gove, question mark. Do you think he's going to be featuring this afternoon?
Well, not too long
to find out. Have you got some inside information? No, all right.
Not too long to find out, but I wish I did. And if I did, I would be bringing it straight here.
Of course you would.
You won the office sweepstake that we were having last Thursday. You said it would be Rishi. I said it would be Boris. We're not preserving any dignity here, are we, actually? Mark said it would be Hunt. You got it right. You said it would be Rishi. You must be overjoyed.
No, I'm delighted.
Did you pay out on that, by the way? Did you get any money? No, did we? No. Anyway, there we are. What job do you think Michael Gove would like? Let's put it that way.
Well, I think he'd be happy to serve anywhere. I think he's a man that should be in the cabinet. I think anybody who knows him knows that he's just brilliant in the department that can deliver. So whether Rishi feels the need to put him back in the cabinet office where I served with him, which is a department that looks under the car bonnet of all other departments to make sure that they're achieving their priorities, that they're delivering.
With a grown-up in charge.
With adults in the room. And that's been the key, one of the key phrases from Team Rishi today, to make sure that there are grown-ups in the room, the adults have returned to the cabinet table, that there's unity within the party. And I think, whatever you think of Michael, there's no doubt that he is a brilliant speaker, he's a brilliant orator, he's brilliant at the dispatch box, and you need people like that when we're in such a bad place in the polls to take that fight to Labour.
Just tell us about, Liz Truss has obviously departed, but all her staffers will have gone with her, all the advisors, like the role that you performed. Where will they be now? Down the pub? Do they get some recompense? I think they do. You do get a payment actually from the taxpayer, if I'm correct.
Not as much as the Prime Minister.
Well, no, but it's not insignificant. But I don't know if the length of her tenure affects that, or if I think it's automatic that all former advisors get payouts on departure.
There is an automatic sort of minimum sort of 3-term sort of payout, but slightly longer if you've served for a longer period of time. So it just reflects your experience and the nature and for how long that you've been there. I suspect a lot of them will be down the pub, drowning their sorrows. I think it's not been a particularly great time for them because ultimately, they were a team. And when you're in politics, it's a team game. And, they're just about to settle into number 10, hoping to help the Prime Minister achieve all what she was setting out to achieve. And obviously, they've not been able to do that. So some may be retained by Rishi.
I was going to say, surely it's crazy to dump everyone and start from scratch again. You need some continuity, don't you?
You do, but I think one of the problems, again, that Liz faced, which I don't think Rishi is going to fall down the same sort of rabbit hole by reaching out to all parts of the Conservative Party to make sure you have a cabinet of talents. Liz appointed her friends, her chums, her people that supported her. She appointed people to special advisor roles that were just on the campaign team that had never been in government before. So if you don't have people of experience in number 10, then it's not looking a particularly great start.
Back to that phrase, the grown-ups.
The grown-ups should return to the cabinet table.
Charlie, as a grown-up, thanks for joining us.
And you're staying, I
more
hope.
for you throughout the afternoon, of course.
Rishi Sunak has become the country's first Asian Prime Minister. It's a historic milestone. Our national reporter Paul Hawkins has been speaking to members of the South Asian community to find out how they feel about the new Prime Minister.
I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
From the shortest-serving PM in history to one of the shortest-serving male PMs this century.
So many of you say to me, wow, you're even shorter in real life.
He's only 5'6", but achieving the highest office in the land is a big moment.
Let me tell you a story about a young woman almost a lifetime ago.
During the leadership campaign in the summer, we heard a lot about his background.
And the love of her family.
He's also spoken about his experience of racism, telling the BBC in 2019 how he'd experienced the P word while sitting in a fast food restaurant with his family when he was young. It's seared in my memory, he said. It stung in a way that is hard to explain. And that's why the UK's first British Asian and Hindu PM means a lot to worshippers here. This is one of Europe's biggest Hindu temples in Neasden, northwest London. They're celebrating Diwali, the Hindu festival of light, on the day Sunak won the race to be PM.
I think it's a very proud and historic moment for the British Indian community. I think more importantly for the younger generation to take inspiration that, people of all backgrounds, from all ethnicities, can aspire to the highest office. They can engage in public service and be a part of that world. I think that's very significant.
But not everyone from an Asian background thinks the PM's colour is relevant.
It's not about race. It's someone who needs. Our country is, at the moment, our country is on the downfall.
I think it's actually quite positive for us as British Asians, of course, because it's the first time it's ever happened, and it's opened up doors for us younger generation. So I'm a student here in Birmingham, and I feel like it gives us the opportunity and the inspiration to go after a job like that, knowing that somebody from our background has got that.
At 42 years old, he's also the youngest PM for over 200 years.
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be in a Star Wars movie, so that's probably not a sensible thing to do. But I'm a massive football fan. I'm from Southampton, and if I would get to be able to run Southampton football... Oh, wow, is there a Saints fan here? Look at that!
This was 3 years ago when he was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, seeing the latest flick with the then-Chancellor Sajid Javid. The force, however, was with Sunak. A few months later, he became Chancellor and had to borrow record sums of money to support the economy through COVID, dishing out his Eat Out to Help Out scheme to support the hospitality industry. The following April, along with Boris Johnson, he was fined for breaking lockdown rules but refused to resign, choosing instead to step down as Chancellor in July after the PM's handling of Chris Pincher's resignation as Deputy Chief Whip. Sunak's departure triggering the downfall of Boris Johnson's government, something the former PM's supporters have never forgiven him for. But September's loser is October's winner.
I'd like to pay tribute to Liz Truss for her dedicated public service to the country.
Can he unite his party and get inflation down? And does he have the ability to win over voters in the famous Red Wall seats? He'll need all his Jedi mind tricks. Paul Hawkins, GB News.
Cabinet reshuffle is underway. To tell us what the latest is on that, who's out?
Wendy Morton, the Chief Whip, has just tweeted saying that she's going off to the back benches. Wendy Morton obviously was the Chief Whip who was involved in that farcical scene in Parliament the other day with the fracking vote. She might be quite pleased to be out of the limelight for a bit. So it's
and a personal friend of Liz Truss, so that might explain why she's taken that decision.
Yes, it feels as though, although it sounds
I think their friendship was strained.
Their friendship was very strained by last week. Yes, a former personal friend of Liz Truss. So it feels as though yes, the sackings have started. So we're just waiting to see who Rishi brings in as his new cabinet. I've been hearing that there are around 40 people who are expecting top ministerial jobs from Rishi Sunak. So he obviously won't be able to keep all of them happy. It'll be very interesting to see what the disappointed ones go on to do.
Excellent. Well, we'll keep our eyes and ears to the ground on that. All the comings and goings as they happen here on GB Newsday. First, let's get a news update.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to fix what he called the mistakes of Liz Truss's leadership. Addressing the country outside Downing Street for the first time in his new role, he said the nation should be braced for difficult decisions ahead. Earlier, King Charles invited Mr Sunak to form a new government, confirming him as Prime Minister. Speaking outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions to come as he pledged to place economic stability at the heart of his government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them.
Well, Rishi Sunak is currently at the House of Commons, where he's carrying out a cabinet reshuffle. Some departures have already taken place, with Jacob Rees-Mogg resigning as the Business Secretary and Brandon Lewis as Justice Secretary. And Chief Whip Wendy Morton, as we've just heard, has also left her post. Current Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is widely expected to remain in his role. Well, earlier, Liz Truss bid farewell to Number 10, saying brighter days lie ahead, as she urged the incoming Prime Minister to be bold. In her final speech from Downing Street, she praised her government, adding they had acted urgently and decisively as she spoke of cutting taxes.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
In other news, a human rights activist is believed to have been arrested in Qatar after staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in any Gulf state. A video appears to show Peter Tatchell being approached by a police officer outside the National Museum in Doha. This comes just 26 days before the Football World Cup is due to take place in the country. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. You're watching GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero, and Mark Longhurst for our continued coverage of the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and what will soon be his new team.
Yeah, it's all happening, but opposition parties continue to call for a general election, including the Lib Dems. The leader, Sir Ed Davey, tweeting earlier, Rishi Sunak's words will do nothing to reassure struggling people worried sick about the winter ahead, going on to say that he wanted to win the public's trust but refuses to trust the public with a general election.
We can now speak to Liberal Democrat MP Munira Wilson. Munira, you're not going to get a general election. Why waste your breath in calling for one continually?
Well, I know the people are calling for a general election. I can tell you from talking to my constituents, and if you look at the polling, the British public want to have a say on who is their Prime Minister and are sick and fed up of this Conservative chaos that has been brought upon us, not just for the last few days and weeks, but frankly for months now. And it's time that they actually gave the country a say, rather than for having the third Prime Minister this year who hasn't been elected by a single vote of the public, and nor was Liz Truss, only Conservative Party members. So people are desperate for a say, and lifelong Conservative voters are coming up to me in my constituency saying they're fed up and they can't possibly support this government anymore.
The problem is, though, given the economic circumstances, no matter who gets in, whether it's a Labour government or whether maybe it's a coalition of Lib Dem and Labour, would you really want that job and having to take that economy on and solve the problems?
Look, what this country needs at this moment is some stability, not a Conservative Party that is mired itself in civil war and brought chaos upon us. They've pushed up people's mortgage bills by hundreds of pounds a month. They've got left schools and hospitals on their knees, struggling to cope. Yes, it's a difficult situation, but what we need is a change of government and people who are actually going to put the country first rather than their party first, which is all we've seen from this Conservative Party.
And your reaction to our first ever British Asian Prime Minister, what does that mean to you, Munira?
Well, look, as I use the label brown on myself, as a brown person myself, of British Asian myself, obviously it is an important moment in terms of our history and our social history to see a brown PM in charge. My parents honestly didn't think that this could or would happen. That doesn't take away from the fact that I profoundly disagree with most of what Rishi Sunak stands for, and I feel that he's out of touch with the country. But yes, of course, we must acknowledge that this is a really important moment for diversity and also for showing people of all ethnic origins out there in the country that it is possible to raise to the highest rank of government as well as business and in all other walks of life. So, of course, from that perspective, it is a positive moment.
You have talked about the division in the Tory party. I think civil war's even been used by one or two people. But clearly the initial reaction, at least, seems to have brought the party together. They may be there for the next 2 years.
Well, I'm not sure it has brought the party together. We're seeing a lot of sniping from the sidelines already, and
such
we've
as
got the budget coming up next. Well, I mean, you've seen people like Nadine Dorries and Christopher Chope all actually calling for a general election, just as we are, and people concerned about what's coming down the tracks and that he doesn't have a mandate. And next week, no doubt, we're going to hear a whole load of cuts to public spending and public services outlined, none of which were voted for by the public, and hence, and I suspect you'll see, the rats in a sack fighting once again openly over what's announced in the budget next week.
Munira Wilson from the Liberal Democrats, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Thank you.
Let's just update you on what we understand to be going on, that Rishi Sunak is actually in the Prime Ministerial office within the House, or the Palace of Westminster, rather than at number 10, to put together this new cabinet and the wider government. We know Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg has stood down, big backer, of course, of Boris Johnson, who once called the Prime Minister, or the new Prime Minister, a socialist, we remember.
We also know that Wendy Morton, who was Chief Whip, is out, and Brandon Lewis too. Probably sort of resigning, but actually probably going before they were pushed, and hoping that they can go with, to provide a bit of space for the new Prime Minister to assemble his new team. So who might be the Home Secretary?
Well, let's cross to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor at the Home Office. Grant Shapps, of course, only in the job for a week or two, and clearly the government will want some kind of continuity. But suggestions that there may be problems within the party about this issue of migration, and whether there's a need to get migration for economic terms to get the growth in the economy.
Yeah, that was certainly a fundamental issue as far as Suella Braverman was concerned, and instrumental, I think, in her departure from the Home Office. Her concern that the government's policy in increasing net migration to the UK to stimulate the economy and boost growth was something that she was fundamentally opposed to. In the year to June of last year, there were just under 240,000 net migration figure. Now that is equivalent to a city the size of Wolverhampton or Derby each year, and clearly it puts a strain on local infrastructure with a growing population. It's something that Suella Braverman felt very opposed to. It was a direction of travel that Liz Truss and her government were headed in. Will Rishi Sunak be on that same journey? Well, he may well be, and whoever is in the Home Office. It may be Grant Shapps, it may be someone new. Will have to buy into that as well. You mentioned there Brandon Lewis has gone from the Justice Department. Now the Justice Secretary, of course, not as high profile as the Home Secretary. It's not one of the 3 great offices of state, or 4 if you include the Prime Minister, but still a very important government department nonetheless, dealing with the criminal justice system, our courts and our prisons. And to put not too subtle a point on it, the criminal justice system at the moment is not far from meltdown. We've got a massive backlog in the court systems, for instance. The austerity years and of course 2.5 years or more of the COVID pandemic have led to a huge backlog within the Crown Court system and the Magistrates' Court. In England and Wales, 58,000 backlog in court cases in the Crown Court and 340,000 backlog in cases at Magistrates' Courts. So a mammoth job for the criminal justice system to try to get that very high backlog number reduced. And of course, with that, there's also the issues around sentencing and around probation that often rear their ugly heads as well. So an important department that Rishi Sunak will have to find a new Justice Secretary for, as well as, of course, the Home Office and other government departments.
Mark at the Home Office, thanks very much indeed for updating us. Back to you, of course, as we get more news, but perhaps likely Grant Shapps will stay in that position. But let's talk about the constitutional issues surrounding today, because King Charles III making his first prime ministerial appointment since ascending to the throne.
Rishi Sunak was invited to form a government in a ceremony known as the kissing of hands, although there is no actual kissing of hands involved. Earlier, outgoing Prime Minister Liz Truss met with King Charles for the last time when she formally offered her resignation.
Joining us now to discuss the events, our royal reporter, correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, no recording of Oh Dear, Oh Dear, I think was the last time you met Liz Truss, of course. Clearly the King will have to be a bit more circumspect this time.
Indeed, that first audience with Liz Truss, he was saying, oh dear, oh dear. From my understanding, that is because it's unusual for TV cameras actually to be in the room when the weekly audience takes place. But because it was the first one, it was deemed appropriate for TV cameras to capture the moment. So he wasn't actually talking about Liz Truss's premiership or indeed running of the government. But nonetheless, today it was Rishi Sunak's turn to have an audience with the King, his first as Prime Minister, because the King formally asked him to form a government in his name. Rishi Sunak, of course, the leader of the Conservative Party, the political party with the majority of seats in the House of Commons, and therefore can command the confidence of the House. Now, Rishi Sunak and King Charles have worked together before, but when they were Chancellor and the Prince of Wales, it was back in May that they met young people supported by the Prince's Trust, which is one of King Charles's former charities, as part of the government's Kickstarter scheme. And no doubt over the next weeks and months to come, they will be working together a lot more frequently. First of all, I think perhaps the big thing we'll see is that state visit with South Africa, which is expected at the end of November. The King and the Queen Consort are hosting the President of South Africa, and no doubt the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will be heavily involved in that. And then we have the coronation in May next year. And I think one of the challenges of the collaboration between Buckingham Palace and the government is deciding quite how much public money is going to be spent on that coronation. Of course, you've got the balance between the pomp and ceremony, which everybody loves about Great Britain, but also being mindful of the fact that we are in a cost of living crisis. So I think perhaps that's going to be something they will discuss in the weeks and months ahead in those private weekly audiences.
Cameron, outside Buckingham Palace there with still the crowds enjoying the day, of course, another constitutional day of note. We'll be back to you a little later, of course.
Just going to take a brief moment to take you to a story which is not about the Prime Minister, and his new team will be going back there straight after this issue, because in the past few hours, the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell has been arrested in Qatar. His charity has said he was staging the first ever public LGBT plus protest the country has ever seen.
Well, he was actually standing outside the National Museum in Doha wearing this T-shirt saying Qatar was anti-gay. The country, of course, hosting the World Cup in a short time. Many issues of controversy because of their human rights record and what's claimed to be, certainly by human rights campaigners, a fairly stiff clampdown on protest. Joining us now, Bill Browder, human rights activist and indeed a friend of Peter Tatchell. Bill, are we any clear what's actually happened out there?
They kept him in custody for a little under an hour, and he's been released. But this arrest raises all sorts of really unpleasant questions for the Qataris. You know, on one hand, they're trying to invite the whole world to the World Cup. And on the other hand, they're arresting a man who's holding a placard out on a street because he's criticizing their treatment of gay people in their countries. And I think those two are incompatible. And it really is a very dark stain on Qatar to do this to Peter Tatchell, who's just exercising his rights for free expression.
I think you said he had been held for an hour. I think that's what you just said. Where? How was he treated? Give us some more detail about that, Bill.
Well, all we know is what he's posted on his Twitter, but he said that they took him in for questioning, 49 minutes to be exact. They questioned him for various about what he was doing, why he was there, etc. And then, according to him, he's on the next flight out of Qatar. So I'm sure we'll hear more from him as this whole situation unfolds. But you know, these guys are trying to play both sides. They want to be some kind of like fascist Islam or homophobic country on one hand, and on the other, they want to invite the whole world in. They apparently have some big deal with David Beckham to like promote them as a country. And you know, you either have to put one, take one your feet out of the fascist world, or you have to admit that this is not a place for most people to visit.
Can I put it to you, Bill, he knew what the reaction would be when he put that T-shirt on?
Well, he's been in a lot of countries doing this type of stuff. You don't change the world by agreeing to unreasonable laws and persecution of minorities, persecution of gay people, etc. It's just not in the world we live in today. We don't live that way here in the United Kingdom. And if they want to have us come and visit us at their World Cup, they shouldn't have those rules there either.
Thank you very much indeed, Olivia Utley. We are back to our political reporter. More goings.
More goings. Chloe Smith has gone as Work and Pensions Secretary, and Vicky Ford has gone as a Minister of State at the Foreign Office. Chloe Smith backed Liz Truss in the leadership election over the summer, but backed Rishi Sunak in this leadership election. So he's showing he's willing to kick out people who have been relatively loyal to him. I think one problem that Rishi Sunak might have is with appointing women, because most of his most loyal supporters are white men, actually.
That picture, actually, outside was
very
really stark, wasn't it?
Yeah, because you've got Oliver Dowden, Dominic Raab, Mel Stride. Most of the people close to him are men. And I think Paul Goodman had a very pithy way of pushing it in his Conservative Home column. He said, the new Prime Minister must balance experience and youth, loyalty and unity, right and left, the different parts of the UK, while being sensitive to the appointment of ethnic minorities and women, and bearing in mind that most Tory MPs are neither. So it just shows the scale of the problem that Rishi Sunak has on his hands if he's going to appoint an experienced, talented and sort of optics-friendly cabinet.
We'll bring you all the comings. Well, we haven't had any comings yet, but all the goings and the comings when we get them too. Thanks, Olivia, for now.
And, of course, we're wondering what's happening out there in the various constituencies. Let's reflect on the importance of the Red Wall. One of those seats, the constituency of
Had a terrible MP, terrible Labour MP.
Yeah, it didn't last long.
No, 9.5 years. I loved that place, actually. I really did love that place.
Well, let's catch up with Will Hollis because he's there now. And Will, clearly it's no longer Labour, it's gone to Tory. But of course, it's very important to learn their assessment as they change leader and, of course, the new Prime Minister as to how they would vote in the future.
Yes, well, where we are today, Sutton in Ashfield, this former Red Wall seat because of the past as a coal mining community. It's a very busy day here today in Sutton in Ashfield, as was made evident when a group of young children earlier screamed at us while we were live. There's also been a lot of people coming up to me today and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing in Sutton in Ashfield? Taking a bit of an interest. And I was saying, we're getting people's opinion on Rishi Sunak, and one lady who asked that question said, oh no, I wanted Boris Johnson, and then somebody on the other side said, oh yeah, I wanted Boris Johnson, and I wanted Boris Johnson, and it was literally like an echo that went around this square here in the heart of Sutton in Ashfield. And while it is very much a day about Rishi Sunak taking the reins as the 57th Prime Minister of Britain, a lot of people are talking instead about Boris Johnson, as you can see.
No, I don't want him. I want Boris back. I think he should have stayed and we should have let him finish what he started. I really do. I mean, I don't think anybody could have done a better job. I know there were a lot of backlash and things like that, and he made a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying he didn't. But the recession and everything, I don't think anybody could have got us through the pandemic the way he did.
As normal people, where we come from and stuff, I think it would be more beneficial for the high-end people, you know. So I don't think it's going to benefit us in any way, but we'll see.
When he took the 5p off the fuel, if it's his reality, because he's so wealthy, is he really going to be for the people, or is it going to just be more wealthy people as such?
That's it, really. We should have had a choice in everything, and we haven't, and it feels like people are just being ignored.
Yes, well, back in 2019, when this Red Wall seat turned to the Conservatives for the first time since the 1970s, there were really two things that those former Labour voters were voting for. It was the double-barrelled B, it was Boris and Brexit. So if there is going to be an election in the near future, or if we do see right the way through to January 2025, Boris is gone and Brexit, there isn't going to be that snazzy slogan. There isn't also going to be Jeremy Corbyn as well. So Rishi Sunak does certainly have a few problems already here in Red Wall seats like this one, Ashfield. Of course, now Ashfield's Conservative MP, Lee Anderson, who seems to be very popular here, he gets a 5,000 seat majority. He said that the party does need to unite now behind Rishi Sunak. And if you look down his Facebook page, a lot of the comments from people who are clearly his constituents, the two main things that people here are saying are that they would have preferred to see Boris, that Rishi Sunak is a backstabber, and they're going to consider going to another party, and the party they keep mentioning isn't Labour, it isn't a return to those red seats, it's a turn instead to a party called Reform.
So incredibly interesting. Worth pointing out probably as well that Labour came third, went from first to third in that seat. Fascinating to get the views there. Will Hollis, thank you.
More to come, of course, from the various constituencies. More to come from Downing Street and Westminster. Rishi Sunak in number 10. Well, actually in Westminster at the moment, making all the important cabinet appointments. We'll have the very latest for you. Let's take a short break first.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Tamsin Roberts with the latest from the GB newsroom. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to fix what he called the mistakes of Liz Truss's leadership. Addressing the country outside Downing Street for the first time in his new role, he said the nation should be braced for difficult decisions ahead. Earlier, King Charles invited Mr Sunak to form a new government, confirming him as Prime Minister. Speaking outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak warned of difficult decisions to come as he pledged to place economic stability at the heart of his government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them.
Well, Rishi Sunak is currently at the House of Commons, where he's carrying out a cabinet reshuffle. Some departures have already taken place, with Jacob Rees-Mogg resigning as the Business Secretary and Brandon Lewis as Justice Secretary. Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith has also left her role. Current Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is widely expected to remain in his role. Well, earlier Liz Truss bid farewell to Number 10, saying brighter days lie ahead, as she urged the incoming Prime Minister to be bold. In her final speech from Downing Street, she praised her government, adding they had acted urgently and decisively as she spoke of cutting taxes.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen, after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
World leaders have congratulated Rishi Sunak on becoming the UK's new Prime Minister. US President Joe Biden and Ukraine's president are among those who've welcomed the news. Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to strengthen the partnership between the two countries. Meanwhile, Russia says it does not expect relations between Britain and the Kremlin to improve. To other news now. New figures show the price of low-cost everyday grocery items like pasta, tea and cooking oil have soared. The Office for National Statistics says budget items have increased in cost by around 17% over the last 12 months. It comes as inflation is at a 40-year high, with prices up 10.1% in a year. Food prices drove the latest rise in living costs in September, along with energy bills and transport costs. A human rights activist has been released after being detained by police in Qatar for staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in a Gulf state. A video had appeared to show Peter Tatchell being approached by a police officer outside the National Museum in Doha. This comes just 26 days before the Football World Cup is due to take place in the country. A Russian court has rejected an appeal by American basketball player Brittany Griner against her 9-year prison sentence. The two-time Olympic gold medalist was arrested in February for the possession and smuggling of drugs and sentenced in August. She was arrested at Moscow airport with vape cartridges containing cannabis oil, which is banned in Russia. A US diplomat has criticised the court's rejection, calling it excessive and disproportionate. Royal Mail workers are striking today for 24 hours in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. It's the latest in a series of industrial action taken by members of the Communication Workers Union. The CWU says its Royal Mail members have had an unagreed 2% pay deal imposed on them at a time when inflation is in double figures. An investigation is underway after 2 men have been killed in a shooting in London. Officers were called to Henley Road in Ilford in the early hours of this morning, following reports of a fight and shots being fired. They found 3 men with gunshot injuries. A man in his 20s was pronounced dead at the scene, while another died a short time later. The 3rd victim was taken to hospital and remains in a critical condition. No arrests have been made. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Mark and Gloria.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. Welcome back to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst, and with Gloria.
We have a new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak was appointed by the King shortly before midday. He said he would put right the mistakes made by his predecessor, Liz Truss.
Well, he's currently appointing his new cabinet. That's taking place at the Prime Ministerial office in Westminster. We're bringing all the latest, of course, as we get it, and all the names of those going out and those coming in as well, hopefully.
So, some members of the government, of Liz Truss's cabinet, have already quit their jobs, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, Brandon Lewis, the Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, the Work and Pension Secretary, Chloe Smith.
Well, let's listen again to what Rishi Sunak said as he arrived in Downing Street just before lunchtime.
Good morning. I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I'm standing here as your new Prime Minister. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy markets and supply chains the world over. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions, Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes, nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them. And that work begins immediately. I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come. But you saw me during COVID doing everything I could to protect people and businesses with schemes like furlough. There are always limits, more so now than ever. But I promise you this: I will bring that same compassion to the challenges we face today. The government I lead will not leave the next generation, your children and grandchildren, with a debt to settle that we were too weak to pay ourselves. I will unite our country, not with words, but with action. I will work day in and day out to deliver for you. This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours. I will always be grateful to Boris Johnson for his incredible achievements as Prime Minister, and I treasure his warmth and generosity of spirit. And I know he would agree that the mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one individual. It is a mandate that belongs to and unites all of us. And the heart of that mandate is our manifesto. I will deliver on its promise: a stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders, protecting our environment, supporting our armed forces, levelling up, and building an economy that embraces the opportunities of Brexit, where businesses invest, innovate, and create jobs. I understand how difficult this moment is. After the billions of pounds it cost us to combat COVID, after all the dislocation that caused, in the midst of a terrible war that must be seen successfully to its conclusions, I fully appreciate how hard things are. And I understand too that I have work to do to restore trust after all that has happened. All I can say is that I am not daunted. I know the high office I have accepted, and I hope to live up to its demands. But when the opportunity to serve comes along, you cannot question the moment, only your willingness. So I stand here before you, ready to lead our country into the future, to put your needs above politics, to reach out and build a government that represents the very best traditions of my party. Together, we can achieve incredible things. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter with hope. Thank you.
So that was Rishi Sunak, all 5 minutes and 56 seconds. They measured it outside number 10. But then he went straight to Westminster, to his prime ministerial office there for the cabinet reshuffle. Olivia Utley is with us in the studio still because we've got plenty of goings, no comings as yet. But who's out?
Well, lots of goings. I think it's turning out to be more of a clear-out than many were expecting. In the last 10 minutes or so, Kit Malthouse, the Education Secretary, has gone. Jake Berry, the party chairman, has gone. And Robert Buckland, who was the... God, he was Wales.
Welsh yeah.
Just double-checking, second-guess myself there. But those are three pretty big scalps. I mean, Kit Malthouse is well-known, sort of safe pair of hands. He's been in government quite a long time. But I think it's quite interesting that Rishi Sunak has freed up that Education Secretary role, because that's pretty pivotal. Lots of Kemi Badenoch's backers, and she had a lot over the summer, thought that she should go into education. She spoke up very fiercely against sort of critical race theory being taught in schools. And many on the sort of cultural right of the Conservative Party believe that winning the culture wars begins with the education department. So it'll be interesting to see if some sort of social conservative like Kemi Badenoch goes into education. Jake Berry is a close friend of Boris Johnson's, which might be why he's gone. But he's quite popular among the party membership, and he obviously chairs that Northern Reform Group, which is very, very influential. So it'll be interesting to see how he behaves on the backbenches. As for Buckland, I mean, he flip-flopped like crazy. He supported Rishi Sunak and then defected to Liz Truss over the summer. So I hardly blame the Prime Minister for losing him.
I want to bring in our former government insider, Charlie Rowley. So all these key figures with the biggest jobs, they have said that they are quitting. Now, that suggests that it is their choice. Is it actually their choice, or have they been given the nod by Rishi Sunak's aides and said, look, I want you to go with dignity, say you're quitting, otherwise I'll have to fire you? What's the truth of what goes on behind the closed doors?
I think that's absolutely right, Gloria. I think when you get the phone call from the number 10 switchboard that says the Prime Minister wants to see you in his or her parliamentary office, then you kind of know what's coming, because the sackings take place in Westminster, the appointments take place in Downing Street, to allow the new incumbents to walk up the street and be lauded in front of the world's media. So when you get the call to say you're going to the parliamentary office, you know it's bad news. But in a sign of unity, and I think Rishi will know this more than most after the last leadership election, where it was very, very divisive and open warfare, it seemed, amongst the party between Rishi and Liz. I think this is a sign of just trying to keep things calm by allowing people to say, look, there's no room for you in the cabinet, but it's your choice. If you want to go, tweet it in your way, put out your letter of resignation, go in your own terms, and it just allows people to take that bit of control.
Dignified.
Yes, dignity.
Exit. We have to ask you as well, because you were Michael Gove's special advisor. His name is on a quite long list for various top jobs. Where do you think he might end up?
Well, as Olivia rightly said, there seems to be a bit more of a clear-out than anybody was expecting. I think Simon Clarke, who is the current Levelling Up Secretary, will probably not remain there. He was very, very close to Liz. He was part of the quad that she brought in, that was part of the economic reforms that clearly didn't work out. There's a lot of talk that Michael might be asked to go back to the Department of Levelling Up. He may go to the Cabinet Office to continue the union work that he was doing. We heard again, Liz Truss didn't even pick up the phone to Nicola Sturgeon or First Minister Mark Drakeford in Wales. So relations within the four constituency, exactly, the constituent parts of the UK are fraught. So whether Michael can come back in and be that union figure to bring the UK as back together and as in harmonious fashion as it can be, we'll have to wait and see.
It's intriguing stuff, isn't it? We'll be back to both of you for more as we get it. Now, we're learning more about our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. We know that he was born in Southampton in 1980. His parents came to the UK from East Africa, are both of Indian origin. His father worked as a GP, his mother was a pharmacist and ran a local pharmacy.
Well, our GB News reporter Jeff Moody is actually at that very building. Well, it's still a pharmacy. Well, there we are, on the corner there in Southampton. Jeff.
It is indeed. It's now called Bassett Pharmacy. For years it was Sunak Pharmacy, and this is where Rishi Sunak says that he learned how to balance the books, and market's still standing. So I'm taking that as a good sign. He was born at Southampton General Hospital, just down the road from here, in 1980, and this was his hood. This is where apparently the young Rishi Sunak used to bomb along on his bike, big smile on his face, and that's what people are remembering about the whole Sunak family, that they were happy, that they were smiley, that they were friendly people. This is also where he got his first taste of public service. More specific, he used to serve the public at the Indian restaurant down the road. He was a massive sports fan, as we know. He particularly loved his football. He was a great supporter of Saints, and he used to go down to the Dell, the erstwhile Southampton FC football ground, to cheer them on. And on his 13th birthday, he received a card signed by all of the Saints players. And apparently that's his most treasured possession. So I'm presuming that'll be framed and on the wall of number 10 before the day is out. His favourite player, Matt Letizia, too. After he left here, he then went to school in Romsey, just down the road. Then he went on, as we know, to Winchester College and then to Oxford. And the rest is history, ending up with being our first British Asian Prime Minister from today. Talking to people here today about how they feel about that, an awful lot of pride, as you can imagine. Pride that their local lad has done as good as he possibly can, and also a certain amount of pride about the chemist shop. People saying our local chemist is now the most famous chemist in the country. People are enjoying that too.
The feel-good factor at the pharmacy. Jeff, thanks very much for updating us down there in Southampton. Thank you.
Joining us now is the Conservative MP, James Cartledge, who backed Rishi Sunak for the leadership. James, you must be delighted that your man is in number 10. Why do you think it took nearly 24 hours for Boris Johnson to congratulate him?
I'm absolutely delighted, as you say, with the result. I think the most important thing is, my constituents in South Suffolk were worried about the economy. I've had a lot of correspondence with businesses, from people who've got mortgages who were nervous about what was happening. And I think with Rishi coming into post with the full support of the party from all wings, and yes, as you say now, from Boris Johnson, that sense that we're going to have some stability back. We've got a real chance to move forward after these difficult weeks. So I'm delighted, as you say, but ultimately I'm delighted for the country.
Are we getting an indication, James, with the names that are coming through about those leaving office, that this may be rather more than a minor reshuffle, that he's really going to want to have to get a government in his own making?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a long way to go on that front. There's clearly been some significant changes already. But, I have huge faith that he will want to bring together talent from all wings of the party. He knows that we have to unite as a party so that we can deliver for the country. And I think that's been his key message. And actually, I think from colleagues, and you've seen this, colleagues from every single wing of the party, colleagues from seats all across England, in Scotland and Wales, wanting to support Rishi, wanting for us to come together and get back to work delivering for the country. And I think that stable platform is what we now need. But obviously, yes, in the cabinet reshuffle, a cabinet of all the talents from every wing, and it'll be interesting to see what further changes there are.
James, what we know about Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, we know him as a big spender. Does that stop now?
Well, when you say a big spender, as you know, I was his PPS. I joined him just before the pandemic started. The situation was quite extraordinary that he faced. The economy was closed. And when the economy is closed, the government has to step in to support growth. Otherwise, you have an extraordinarily deep recession. And so he did the right thing. At the time, many people wanted him to go even further. And it has left consequences for the national debt and so on. But I think that he understands that. And that's, by the way, why we did have to bring in some tax changes. I was there when that happened. It was because there were no easy choices to be made. And I think we're back in that sort of position. So, I've got huge faith that we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer and a Prime Minister who understand the challenge before them. You've got to make these difficult decisions. And here's a key point for me. With Rishi, what he will do is level with the country about the choices we face. Because one way around this is to, try and almost, how can I put it, shy away from the difficult choices. With Rishi, his style will be level with the public about the difficult choices and try and carry them with us as we go through them and implementing those changes.
James Cartledge, thank you very much indeed, and for putting up with the noises off, as usual, down at Westminster. Thanks for your time. Let's cross back to Downing Street, shall we?
Yeah, let's speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, a lot's been happening since we last spoke. Tell us, bring us up to date.
Yeah, indeed, it is interesting, isn't it? That clear out, if you like, of the current cabinet. Now, maybe that shouldn't come as a surprise. I know we often refer to these things as a reshuffle, but in many regards, when a new Prime Minister comes in, it really is the forming of a new government, fundamentally, rather than shuffling people around. But there will be a little bit of shuffling, given the fact that, as Rishi Sunak made clear in that speech, he does want to unify not just the country, but indeed the party, and that means reaching out, if you like, to the different sections of that party, including people who did not support him, who either backed Boris Johnson or indeed Liz Truss. But when you go through some of those names, they're not really that surprising. Robert Buckland is out as well, Secretary. He'd been flipping and flopping between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss during the summer. Other people like Kit Malthouse have been very close to Boris Johnson. Other names like Brandon Lewis, maybe a little bit more of a surprise. But then people like Chloe Smith, who, as Work and Pension Secretary, had backed Rishi Sunak as leader. They are also losing their jobs. I think also what is fascinating is that there has to be an element of stability brought here, and that is another word that Rishi Sunak used time and again in his speech today. We are looking at having the fifth Education Secretary this year. Which is quite incredible, really. I mean, that is also true clearly of other departments. Let's say, look at the Home Office. Will Grant Shapps survive there? If not, he could be, or whoever takes over, could be the fourth Home Secretary in the space of 2 weeks. 2 months, I should say. I mean, it really, really is quite incredible. And I think there will be an attempt by Rishi Sunak, whoever he puts in place, to try and get these names right, so that he will not have to change them in the future. And that is his big selling point, isn't it? That was the big point of his speech, his argument that he is a serious politician in serious times that wants to work really hard and provide an element of stability that, frankly, has not been in British politics for at least the last 6 months.
And Darren, just on that note, of course, the economy, the big thing. We are understanding that probably Jeremy Hunt will stay in position at number 11 next door.
Yeah, we think so, not least of all because his appointment, 10 days ago by Liz Truss, did manage to calm the markets. There has been a sense that he's brought some stability to the Treasury as well. He's been working quite well with the Bank of England. You know, he's not necessarily the most popular politician in the Conservative Party, but even his critics have said he's not done a bad job. And I think also, given the fact that he's been working pretty hard over the last 10 days or so on that midterm fiscal event that we're still expecting, I think, next Monday, Halloween, that it would be kind of a little odd and would almost counter that argument about stability if he were to be changed at this moment in time. But be in no doubt, as a former Chancellor, I suspect that Rishi Sunak will be making many of the final decisions. He will not be leaving them up simply to number 11.
Darren, we'll speak to you later in the show. Thank you for the update. We're still joined by our political reporter, Olivia Utley, in the studio, and Charlie Rowley, who is former government advisor to Michael Gove. I'm going to start with you, Olivia. Ranil Jawadina, he was the Environment Secretary. He has also now resigned. He tweeted about a few moments ago that this is a big clear-out. And this is a big clear-out of people who Liz Truss appointed. Surely he wouldn't make the same mistake that she did.
No, I think Rishi Sunak is very aware that what he can't do is just get all of his allies very close to him and get into a sort of echo chamber, because lots of people said that's what happened with the mini budget. Of course, everyone wanted to go for growth, but the sort of merciless way that the Liz Truss cabinet went for growth was probably because they had so many people who thought the same around the table. Rishi Sunak will be careful not to do that. I think this clearing out Liz Truss's closest people might not be a sort of political thing. It might not be because he doesn't want anyone who's sort of tainted by the Liz Truss brush in his cabinet. It might be more that he's going to be looking for experience here. I think unity and experience are the key words for Rishi Sunak. So, yes, he'll be wanting to get people from all different factions, but he'll be very keen to show that while Liz Truss, as Charlie mentioned earlier, had quite a lot of people both in number 10 and in her cabinet who were just her loyalists, just her friends, Rishi Sunak will be going from a much deeper pool, and we'll be getting people, I think, like Dominic Raab and Michael Gove, big beasts with lots of experience in. So I think it's some of these inexperienced people who are getting the chop early on now.
Yeah, latest, Ranil Jawadina resigning as Environment Secretary. Again, another big job. What is the danger that if they're not resigning, but they've actually been pushed, that there is more bad blood on the backbenches?
Well, that's the risk, and there are always winners and losers in reshuffles, and whenever there's a loser, they are a vocal opponent on your own backbenches. I think the difference here between Liz's entry into number 10 and what we're seeing under Rishi is that he has the support of the majority of Conservative backbenchers. Liz never had that, so Rishi came top of the MP ballot at the last leadership election. Yeah. Liz only got in by the Conservative Party membership, so Rishi has got a bit of wiggle room to appoint people who he thinks are going to be the best for the job. As I say, bringing the adults back to the room, those with the more experience, those who've got experience, not just in terms of communication, but in the at the dispatch box in the House of Commons, and who can really take the fight to the Labour Party.
Yeah. Charlie, thank you for that. More, of course, as they come through.
Yes, we can cross live now to GB News South East England reporter Ellie Costello. She is at the Conservative Club in Hornchurch speaking to a Conservative member or members there. Ellie.
Hello, yes, good afternoon to you. We are in Hornchurch Conservative Club this afternoon. We've been here for several hours now and the place is packed. People with their teas and their coffees, their sandwiches, even on the beer and the red wine already. But the conversation on everyone's lips is, of course, about our new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And I've got two guests with me now who are going to discuss this afternoon's activities with us, because there's an awful lot going on, lots of upheaval in number 10 and in the Cabinet as we speak. So on my left is Bob Perry, who is former chairman of Hornchurch and Upminster constituency and also a former Conservative councillor. And on my right is Len Hayhoe, who's a chairman of Hornchurch Conservative Club. So you're the boss, basically, of where we are right now. So really good to be here. Had a really good time with you all this afternoon. So let's start first with Rishi Sunak's speech. We've all watched it together. Your reaction to that? Let's start with you.
It was what I expected to hear. But I was particularly impressed when he spoke about integrity and trust coming back into the government, because I think that the country needs to see that in particular.
And was that needed to say? Do you think that was him kind of pointing a finger towards anyone in particular?
I think it might have been a little swipe at Boris, but I think it was also, having met Rishi, I think that the man does have integrity, and when he says he'll deliver it, I believe he will.
And I was about to ask you, you have met Rishi Sunak, haven't
Yes,
you?
I have.
What would you say to people who say, you know, he's much wealthier than the royal family, 2 times as wealthy as the royal family, and he's now in number 10. He doesn't know about the struggles of working people and working families. What would you say to that?
I'd say that his experience in financial markets and you know, as past jobs he's done, gives him the experience to look after the country's finances, therefore looking after people.
So you're saying give him a chance, you think he's the right man for the job
I do
right
indeed.
now? OK, Len, what did you make of the speech from Rishi Sunak?
Again, like Bob, I'm pleased to see that he mentioned integrity, honesty and mistakes.
Yes.
Mistakes have been made and he's put his hands up and said, look, let's be honest, errors have been made, some quite drastic ones. We need to move on. We need to move on as a country. And this is the important thing, that I believe he will take the country forward and not just play at simple party politics, so that we can hopefully tackle a lot of the problems. Let's face it, there's a lot of problems that exist at the moment for this country and indeed for the world. And we need somebody that will take us forward, has an understanding of the financial markets that he does, and hopefully we can then move on and start slowly to make things better. It's not going to happen overnight, let's be honest about this, but let's start to move forward and take us back to being Great Britain.
Brilliant. Well, really good to have your thoughts here this afternoon. Thank you so much. So the inbox for Rishi Sunak, that in tray is going to be full. We've got the hangover from COVID. We have an energy bills crisis. We've got the war in Ukraine. We've got political infighting in the Conservative Party. Can he fix it? Well, the message here from Hornchurch Conservative Club is give Rishi Sunak a chance.
Oh, yes, he can. Yeah, thank you very much for the reaction there at Hornchurch. What about the reaction from Washington? Let's tell you that the US President Joe Biden has just tweeted, "Congratulations to Rishi Sunak on becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Together, I look forward to enhancing our cooperation on issues critical to global security and prosperity, including our continuing strong support for Ukraine."
The time is 2:33. It's time for your news update.
Gloria, thank you. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom at 2:33. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has vowed to fix what he called the mistakes of Liz Truss's leadership. Addressing the country outside Downing Street for the first time in his new role, he said the nation should be braced for difficult decisions ahead. Earlier, King Charles invited Mr Sunak to form a new government, confirming him as Prime Minister. Speaking outside Number 10, Rishi Sunak pledged to place economic stability at the heart of his government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or bad intentions. Quite the opposite, in fact. But mistakes nonetheless. And I have been elected as leader of my party and your Prime Minister, in part, to fix them.
Well, Rishi Sunak is currently at the House of Commons carrying out a cabinet reshuffle. Some departures have already taken place, including the Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg resigning, along with multiple other cabinet ministers. Meanwhile, current Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is widely expected to remain in his role. Earlier, Liz Truss bid farewell to Number 10, saying brighter days lie ahead, as she urged the incoming Prime Minister to be bold. In her final speech from Downing Street, she praised her government, adding they'd acted urgently and decisively as she spoke of cutting taxes.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy.
In other news, a human rights activist has been released by police in Qatar after staging the first ever public LGBT+ protest in a Gulf state. A video appeared to show Peter Tatchell being approached by a police officer outside the National Museum in Doha. This comes less than a month before the Football World Cup is due to take place in the country. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Latest breaking news we're getting that Simon Clarke, the Levelling Up Minister, has now gone, saying it has been a great privilege to serve. Could that open up a vacancy for a certain Michael Gove? We'll keep you updated on that.
So new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is inheriting a rather full in-tray. Here to run us through it all is Liam Halligan with On the Money.
The UK faces profound economic challenges. They were the words used by Rishi Sunak as he stood outside Downing Street for the first time as Prime Minister. The former Chancellor certainly got his work cut out, and he's the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years. He was born only in 1980. In his in-tray is the cost of living, inflation, and there it is, the graph showing that inflation's gone from under 2% to 10.1% in little more than a year or two. 10.1% in September 2022. That's how much higher the cost of living was than a year earlier. That 10.1% inflation rate, that's a 40-year high. But even that headline number belies the underlying reality in the shopping baskets of many of us as we go around our supermarket and corner shop. Look at these statistics from the Office for National Statistics that came out this morning. In September 2021, a litre of vegetable oil was £1.56. Last month, it was £2.58. That's a 65% rise. Take pasta. That's an ingredient often used by families when they want to save money. It's cheap, it's nutritious, and it's easy to store. In September 21, a 500-gram bag of pasta was 38 pence on average, said the ONS. Last month, it was 61 pence. That's a 60% rise. And look at tea. The UK is built on cups of tea, and yet 125 grams of tea was 67 pence in September 2021. Last month, it was 97 pence. That's 45% higher. And then there's milk, our very lifeblood. £1.17 for 4 pints of milk in September 2021. Last month, £1.52. That's a 30% rise. But it's not just food, it's also borrowing costs, particularly for mortgage holders. You can see from the graph here that even in early January, mortgages were around 3.5, 3.6% on average. They rose steadily all the way to 5.5% on average by September. That was before the mini-budget. The financial turmoil associated with former Chancellor Kwarteng's policies has increased the average mortgage now to around 6%. But there's some good news on the horizon. Since Rishi Sunak came in, government borrowing costs have fallen, the so-called 10-year gilt yield. That's the price that the government must pay to borrow money for a decade per year. On Friday, when it still looked as if there'd be a fractious Tory leadership contest, the 10-year gilt yield, which ripples out across the economy, affecting mortgages and other personal loans, was 4.1%. Today, with the prime ministerialship done and dusted for now, it's down at 3.7%. So if you're looking to remortgage or take out a new mortgage, just wait a little bit, because for now at least, it looks as if government borrowing costs and associated mortgage costs are coming down. The big financial conundrum for Rishi Sunak, though, is the wholesale price of gas. Why? Because that energy price cap, the only real thing that survived from the mini-budget, apart from the national insurance reduction, that cost a huge amount of money to deliver, and the bill to government depends on the wholesale price of gas. But look at this. We're not hearing about it very often, but it's hugely important. Wholesale gas prices, they're now down to below €100 per megawatt hour on European markets, down from €350. That's roughly where they were back in February, before the war in Ukraine. Now, this could change, of course, because if there's more flashpoints in that East-West war between Russia and the West, wholesale gas prices could spike up again. But for now, at least, They're falling. They're still quite high by historic standards, but it's good news for the government and the government finances that the wholesale price of gas is coming down. In sum, Rishi Sunak faces a formidable inbox: inflation, higher borrowing costs, rollercoaster energy prices. He says he's not daunted, but to that list we could add public sector strikes, given that many trade unions are pushing for inflation-busting pay rises of 10% or more, something that's unlikely in the private sector. Rishi Sunak wasn't even alive in the 1970s, but it seems to me the problems he faces, the profound economic challenges, like inflation, like possible strikes, and like high energy prices, they're seeming to resemble more and more the 1970s, that most politically explosive of decades.
Liam, thank you very much indeed for that. And talking about political explosions, there is a cabinet reshuffle underway as we speak. Plenty of goings. Just to update you, Simon Clarke has gone as Levelling Up Minister. Jake Berry has left as Conservative Party Chairman. Robert Buckland as the Welsh Secretary. However, we understand that Grant Shapps is still Home Secretary. Of course, he's only been in the job for a few weeks. Let's speak to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who's at the Home Office. And Mark, suggestions maybe that he's one of the people that could be safe.
Well, I don't know. I think all bets are off at the moment. It's clear that Rishi Sunak is clearing the decks. And why wouldn't he be? You know, people thinking that, oh, just because they've had 2 Home Secretaries, 3 Home Secretaries in the space of 6 weeks, why would you go for more upheaval? Why not? If you're the new Prime Minister and you're looking for what you consider to be the best of talents to run your departments, you're not going to let that stop you, are you, if you want a fresh start in there? So I honestly think all bets could be off. And it's one of the great offices of state, so we can expect that the Home Secretary announcement, whether it will be Grant Shapps staying or someone new, will be one of the first to be announced when Rishi Sunak gets to that point. It's clear at the moment he's in the process of telling those that are in the cabinet that they no longer have a future in his cabinet and allowing them to break the news to the public that they're going. Then we'll follow the appointments, and as normally the case with these appointments, we will get those big offices of state, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor. Now, the speculation, of course, has been that the Chancellor, in Jeremy Hunt, is likely to stay in that post. And because there's been so many Home Secretaries, that perhaps Grant Shapps would be staying. But we just don't know. It depends who Rishi Sunak has in his head as the best person to lead what is a very, very difficult government department with a whole list of competing priorities that they need to get to grips with. Uppermost, of course, the small boat crisis, 38,000 people that have crossed the English Channel in the past year alone, 10,000 more than the whole of the previous year. And then there's the issue as well, of course, that was one of the big issues of concern that Suella Braverman, before Grant Shapps, had, which was the Liz Truss government's proposals to expand legal migration in order to boost the economy and growth. That was something that Suella Braverman was fundamentally opposed to. Is that the direction of travel for the Rishi Sunak government? It may well be, and that will factor into who he feels is the best fit for the job of Home Secretary as well. Other big departments, though, Mark, that we should be looking out for, the Foreign Secretary as well. James Cleverly has been saying already publicly that it should be the best, most talented people for the job. In other words, don't sack me, even though I was backing Boris. And the Defence Secretary, of course, Ben Wallace, largely seen as being a very effective Defence Secretary at a time where we have a war raging in Ukraine.
Thanks very much indeed for that at the Home Office. Back to you, of course, as we hear again about those big jobs and who's going to fill their boots.
We're going to cross now live to Kevin Maguire, Associate Editor at the Daily Mirror. Kevin, always good to see you. There is now a grown-up in number 10. Calm has been restored. That is good news for the country, bad news for the Labour Party, potentially.
Yeah, it depends how much calm has really been restored, how much stability has been restored. Over in Westminster, where I've just come from, a lot of Tories are wandering around looking very, very anxious because they're wondering whether they're either going to get the sack or a job. And look, he made a much better speech today, Rishi Sunak, than he did yesterday. But he wasn't honest because there are brutal cuts coming our way. And when he talks about difficult decisions, he means his decisions are going to be difficult for working people, people on low and middle incomes, families, pensioners, businesses. So I don't buy this calm and stability. Yep, it might have moved forward from the craziness, the utter madness of Liz Truss. But these are still going to be incredibly turbulent times, and people are going to get a lot of pain. He's a better politician, and there's no doubt about that, Rishi Sunak. But he's going to inflict a lot of pain on the country.
Looking at the extent of the reshuffle that's now underway, clearly he's looking at trying to last the 2 years and ignore these calls for a general election. He's going to want to try and make it all the way through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're right there. It can go as late as January 2025 for that general election, and they're so far behind in the polls, are effectively being lapped by Keir Starmer and Labour. Keir Starmer was telling the Labour shadow cabinet today that there's likely to be a bit of a poll bounce for Sunak. That doesn't mean he'll regain a lead. It just means he'll get a bit within touching distance of Labour. But he needs a lot of time. The Tories they've got to try and build their credibility. They've lost it. He says the 2019 manifesto wasn't just Boris Johnson's. To some extent, that's true. Other ways, it's not true because Johnson was such a dominant figure in that election. But if he's going to govern on that manifesto, I could probably name a dozen things that have already been broken in it, including Sunak putting up national insurance when he said he wouldn't do that, cutting international development when he said he wouldn't do that, the Conservatives going after fracking when they said they wouldn't do it. So you could go on and on how promises have been broken already. But you're right, he's going to play for time. That's what he has to do. He has to hope tomorrow is a sunnier day. But I just wonder if what happened with Liz Truss and that special financial operation for the rich, crashing the economy, sending interest rates soaring, people already paying more for their mortgages. And I heard, I was listening to Liam, looking at the figures, saying maybe we're over the worst of that, but there's still bad times to come. Whether this really, for the Conservatives, is a 1992 Black Wednesday moment when the national mood changes, no matter how hard you work, whatever you do after that, you just can't regain people's trust because you squandered it and chucked it away in such a reckless, terrible way.
Kevin, we've seen our first British Indian Prime Minister. The Tories are good at giving us diversity of Prime Ministers. The Labour Party is addicted to white bloc leaders. When will they give up their addiction?
Probably the next leader. Which is probably bad news for Wes Streeton, the Shadow Health Secretary, is a very good politician. So I'm just choking. I think it's the pollution here. But it is, you're right, Gloria, it's a stain on Labour, which practices fairness and preaches equality, that 122 years of asking who is the best person to lead that party, they've always answered a white bloke. When the Conservatives have had 3 women, and now the first Briton of colour. Also the first with Jewish heritage, if we go back to Benjamin Disraeli, although he was a practicing Anglican when he became Prime Minister. The Tories are making Labour look a little embarrassing on that.
Kevin, thank you for that. We'll let you go and wet the whistle at the red line. You've earned it, I think. Thanks very much indeed. OK, let's reflect on what the voters may be thinking of what's going on. Let's join Will Hollis, who is at your former constituency, is that right?
The lovely place of Ashfield in Nottinghamshire. What have they been saying, those great people, Will?
Yes, well, a lot of people going about doing their business, although a lot of the businesses are closing here today. There are a lot of young kids riding around on bicycles, asking me what I'm up to, explaining to them that we've got a new Prime Minister and seeing if they know who Rishi Sunak is. And if you're asking a lot of their parents or adults, they don't seem to be very happy about the fact that that new Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak, because, of course, in places like this, where they voted for Labour for many, many years, but then turned to the Tories in the last general election, election. They turned to the Tories for that double-barreled B, Boris and Brexit. So you can understand why today, even if they are hearing Rishi Sunak say things like Brexit, talk about levelling up, this is one of those key areas that the government have said that they wanted to level up, or talking about veterans, there's a lot of veterans here, talking about things like Remembrance Sunday services and the upcoming things. They're very happy to hear all those sorts of things, but they're not happy that it isn't their main man, Boris Johnson, saying them, as you can see.
No, I don't want him. I want Boris back. I think he should have stayed and we should have let him finish what he started. I really do. I mean, I don't think anybody could have done a better job. I know there were a lot of backlash and things like that, and he made a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying he didn't. But the recession and everything, I don't think anybody could have got us through the pandemic the way he did.
As normal people, where we come from and stuff, I think it would be more beneficial for the high-end people, you know. So I don't think it's going to benefit us in any way. But we'll see.
When he took the 5p off the fuel, if it's his reality, because he's so wealthy, is he really going to be for the people, or is it going to just be more wealthy people as such?
That's it, really. We should have had a choice in everything, and we haven't. And it feels like people are just being ignored.
Now, the last person that I actually spoke to, I said to them, oh, what do you think of Rishi Sunak? And their eyes lit up. They said, I love Rishi Sunak. And the way that they described him was that he speaks clearly, is considerate with money, and he was good during COVID. So while there are only a few people who might be happy to see Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister today in Sutton and Ash.
Well, thank all the shoppers away by the looks of it. No more. Let's hope they come back out shortly. Thank you very much indeed.
You've been watching GB Newsday with Mark Longhurst and Gloria De Piero. Tomorrow we're back at 11:50 because, of course, it's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's first Prime Minister's Questions. We'll have representatives from Labour and from the Conservatives too to look ahead to that, so at 11:50.
Yeah, just to remind you, Rishi Sunak's